Chapter 398. Caught in the act of eloping, Li Yi couldn't continue. Qing and Prefecture and Jingdo were two of the most prosperous cities in Jing Kingdom. Naturally, there was a lot of trade between them. There were often boats on the river. They were now on a medium-sized passenger ship. When he sneaked out in the morning, he didn't alert Mississippi Liu and Xiao Huan because they had left earlier than him and stayed in the compartment next to her and Rui. Only now did Li Yi remember that Xiao Huan had looked at him strangely these days and often ran to Mississippi Liu's room. But because the servant girl had always been obedient, he didn't suspect anything. Now that he thought about it, they should have known about this plan a long time ago. Xiao Huan might really be angry. She was still hiding far away and ignoring him. This was the first time this had happened. There was no such thing as a honeymoon in this world. They wouldn't really think that he was going to elope with Rui and abandon them, would they? Li Yi walked over and looked at her with a smile. "What's wrong? Are you still angry?" Hearing the young master's voice, the servant girl's face lit up. But thinking of second Mrs. Warning, she immediately kept a straight face and turned her head away from him. Li Yi turned again and pinched her face. "Are you really angry at young master?" The servant girl's face was very fleshy. Especially when they were in Willow Village, Li Yi liked to pinch it. Later, for some reason, the days got better and better. Her cheeks were no longer as baby fat as before and slowly shrunk. Her oval face had the tendency to change into an oval face. She lost some of her cuteness, but became more beautiful. The little girl was about to become a big girl. Li looked at her slightly pouting little mouth. His mind was filled with the scenes of the few of them getting along in the past 6 months. At this moment, there were only 4 people in the room. It was like after going around in circles, everything had returned to square one. The servant girl finally turned her head and looked at him with large, watery eyes. She said with a sob in her voice, "Young master, do you and Miss not want us anymore?" There was sadness in her voice, like a little animal that had been heartlessly abandoned. To her, that was the truth. The son-in-law and the young lady were everything to her. If they all left, leaving her and the second young lady alone in the capital, even if they could eat delicacies every day and have maids and servants to serve them, what was the point? Seeing that her eyes were filled with tears, Li Yi suddenly felt a little worried, and a strong sense of guilt welled up in his heart. He seemed to only consider him and Rui, but neglected Xiao Huan and Rui's feelings. Their way of thinking was completely different from his. Leaving without a word like this might really make them think more. No matter where young master and Miss go in the future, they will take you with them. Li Yi held her shoulders and patted her gently. Really? The young maidservant's eyes were still misty. She wiped her eyes with her hands, revealing her dimples. "You've stopped crying so quickly?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise. "You've learned to cry and act pitiful. Who taught you this?" Having been exposed by Li Yi, the young maidservant blushed and ran away in a hurry. Ignoring her little thoughts, Li Yi sat back down at the table and continued his unfinished work. The distance from the capital to Qing and Prefecture was not very far. Following the river, if the speed was fast, it would only take a day and a night to arrive. However, this passenger ship was not transporting any important goods, and there was no urgent matter, so there was no need to travel so quickly. It was leisurely and would take about 3 days to arrive. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry. He had long wanted to see the famous mountains and rivers of this world. On the table was a simple map that he had asked Li Xian to get. The main drawing on it was the waterways between Qing and Prefecture and the capital. The maps of this world were far from being as detailed and standard as those of the future. Usually, only the government and the imperial court would use them. The emphasis was on practicality. They were either next to mountains or next to rivers. There were no satellites, so they had to be manually measured. Li Yi marked a few asterisks on the map, representing a few important cities in the Jing Kingdom. He used lines to connect them, and finally formed a map from the capital to Qing and Prefecture. He planned to stop at these places for a day or 2 to look at the mountains, the rivers, and the scenery. He wanted to see the differences and the beauty of different places in the Jing Kingdom and enjoy life. His dream in his previous life was to earn enough money to travel around the world. He He wanted to see different sceneries, experience different customs, and experience the beauty of the world. Of course, the last dream could not be realized in his previous life, and the possibility of it being realized in this life was not very high. One should be down to earth, cherish life, and stay away from beauty. Did the young master really leave? Uncle Lee, the housekeeper, held a letter in his hand. He was stunned, and his face was still full of disbelief. He felt that the young master's way of doing things in the past was capricious enough. He did not expect that he still had a very shallow understanding of the young master's capriciousness. How should he explain this to Madame Dowager? All the maids and servants in the Viscount's mansion, including the guards, did not know when the master and Madame left. Not to mention the maids and servants, the guards might feel a burning pain on their faces. Their duty was to protect the main house. Now that everyone had run away, who were they supposed to protect? Uncle Lee held the letter. The letter only said that the young master and Madame would go back to Qing in prefecture and told them not to worry. As for when they would come back, he did not know. When he drove to the Lee mansion to inform Madame Dowager, he still wanted to cry, but had no tears. It was fine to leave, but at least tell them and bring a few guards. How could the master leave without saying goodbye? Madame and the others were all women. What if something happened to them? What? They left. Li Xian jumped down from the carriage and stood at the door of the Viscount's mansion. He looked at the servant and asked, "Where did they go? When will they come back?" The servant could only shake his head helplessly. He only knew that the Viscount, Madame, Second Miss, and Miss Xiao Huan had all disappeared this morning. They only left a letter for housekeeper Li. As for more things, it was not something that he could come into contact with. Li Xian broke into the mansion in disbelief. After a long time, he came out with a dumbfounded face. They left just like that. He originally wanted to find Li to talk about some of his new ideas and have a meal. He did not expect to receive such news. This immediately made him feel disappointed. Go back. He looked back at the Viscount's mansion and got into the carriage with some depression. They really left just like that. Not long after, in the depths of the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the paper on the table and showed an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 399. In the capital, there was a vast piece of flat land behind the Crown Prince's residence. 2 months ago, Li Xian had bought this piece of land. At this moment, a galloping steed galloped along a fixed route under the urging of the rider on its back. A rope was tied to the horse, which was connected to a black spot in the distant sky. A person with good eyesight would be able to see that the black dot was actually a huge kite. Under the peculiarly shaped kite was a black dog with wide, panic-stricken dog eyes. It was looking down at the mountains and rivers beneath it like a king, while cursing the 18 generations of ancestors of the guy who sent it to heaven in his heart. Even though it had flown countless times, it was still a dog. How could a dog be expected to get used to the sky? For it, flying around in the sky with its dog guts was far less interesting than doing happy things with its wife while Lao Wang was not around. Not many people cared what kind of mood the dog was in when it was flying. Several figures stood below and recorded some data on a piece of paper from time to time. There had been no problems in the experiment for half a month, which meant that they would not be able to eat dog meat hot pot for a long time. It was really a sad thing. At noon in April, the weather was sunny, but it was actually a bit hot. Craning his neck for a long time was tiring and also a bit hot. Li Xian took off his outer robe and threw it on the grass beside him. My husband, several concubines in the palace have sent people to ask what kind of perfume will be released next. The madams of those noble families have also invited me many times. The crown prince's wife walked over from a distance, followed by a faint fragrance. Smelling his favorite orchid fragrance, Li Xian was slightly refreshed and said, "Didn't I say that Uncle Huang can't smell that kind of fragrance? What do these concubines want?" A wry smile appeared on Crown Prince Consort's face. Princess Yongla, Li Xianzi, and their family had cooperated in the perfume business, which had caused an unimaginable sensation in the capital. All women, regardless of their status, were infatuated with it. Several perfume shops in the capital had already closed down a month ago. His Majesty's concubine was also a woman with the most distinguished status. How could she be inferior to ordinary people in this kind of business? Even her maiden family had hinted that they wanted to cooperate with her several times. She couldn't imagine how much profit this perfume business would bring if even the Wang family couldn't help but be tempted. However, there was no trace of Li Xianzi during this period of time. Princess Yongle never cared about the business. The perfume business had always been managed by Li Xianzi's residence. As the mistress of the crown prince's residence, she had received countless invitations during this period of time. Naturally, she had become unusually busy. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, they're all concubines after all. It's not good for them to not reply. She handed a small and exquisite wine pot to Li Xian, glanced at the black dot in the sky, and turned her head back. This matter is not urgent. Let's talk about it in a few days. Li Xian held the wine pot in his mouth and gulped down a few mouthfuls. He had learned this way of drinking from Li Yi. Of course, both of them couldn't hold their liquor well, so they could only drink the grape wine in this way. After a while, he put down the wine pot, wiped his mouth, and asked, "What date is it today?" The concubine thought about it and said, "April 8th. April 8th, it's been 2 months. Li Xian stared into the distance and mumbled in a low voice, "It's been 2 months. Where are they?" Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing put down a document and walked out with his hands behind his back. Only after breathing in the fresh air did he feel much better. "Your Majesty, they have been in Yuezhou for 5 days. They should be arriving at the Qing and prefecture soon." Changde stood behind Emperor Jing and said in a low voice, "What a lazy young man. I am about to die from exhaustion in the capital." He, on the other hand, played around for 2 months. If all the officials were like him, my Jing kingdom would have fallen a long time ago. Emperor Jing complained with a smile. Emperor Jing complained with a smile. There was a hint of envy in his tone as he said, "Sometimes I also envy him. Although I am the ruler of a country, I am far less carefree than him." "How about this old servant summon him back?" Changde asked tentatively. Emperor Jing waved his hand and smiled. "Whatever. I am not going to compare myself to him. Since the beginning of time, there has never been an emperor who could live freely. However, now that he is gone, it has been a long time since someone could have a good meal with me." Changde nodded slightly. He didn't know why, but ever since His Majesty hid his identity and ate a meal with that young man at the Ning Palace, His Majesty, who never had much of an appetite, could eat a lot of food in front of him. His Majesty was right. That young man was a weirdo through and through. "The ambassador from the Qi kingdom hasn't left yet?" Emperor Jing casually asked. Changde said no. The third prince of the Qi kingdom is staying at the Honglu temple. He strolls around the capital every day and even visits brothels a few times. However, he hasn't done anything else. I heard that the third prince of the Qi kingdom is good at both literature and martial arts. He is very outstanding among the princes of the Qi kingdom. However, since he hasn't done anything, let him be," Emperor Jing said. When he was about to walk back into the hall with his hands behind his back, there was a sudden noise coming from the corridor on the side. Changde frowned slightly. Recently, the concubines in the palace had been addicted to the perfume. However, County Magistrate Li had told His Majesty to stay as far away from that thing as possible. Changde naturally wouldn't let those concubines get close to His Majesty. These days, he had stopped many of them. Imperial father, this time it was obviously not a concubine. Princess Shaning pushed away 2 guards and trotted over to Emperor Jing. She said happily, "Imperial father, why are you here? It took Shaning a long time to find you." Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "What's wrong? Do you want to go out of the palace to play with your brother Xian again?" Shaning blushed and said, "Imperial father, I'm not as playful as you think. Besides, brother Xian isn't playing. He is making something that is very useful to the Jing kingdom." Emperor Jing smiled and said, "Well, Imperial father is busy. Tell me, what are you looking for me for?" "Oh, I almost forgot." Princess Shaning heard this and immediately waved to the back. She said, "Bring it here quickly." Then she turned to look at Emperor Jing with a smile and said, "Imperial Father, I just made soup. If you're tired of reading the memorials, you can have a taste. Soup." When Emperor Jing heard this, he seemed to think of something terrible. His expression immediately changed, and he hurriedly said, "Shanning, Imperial Father still has a few important memorials to read. You can go play first. Leave the soup there. Imperial Father will drink it later." Looking at Emperor Jing striding into the hall, Princess Shanning looked a little disappointed. Then she seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Changda and said, "The soup won't taste good when it's cold. Chief Steward Chang, you must be tired of serving Imperial Father. Why don't you try it?" Even as a first-class master in the world, he could face a martial arts master head-on. But in the face of Princess Shanning's soup, the face of the #1 master in the palace immediately changed. "Wait, I'll go and get it for you." Princess Shanning ran to the palace maid who was holding the tray. When she turned back to talk to Changda, she found that the opposite side was empty. The door of the Hall of Diligent Government was closed, and a cloud of dust was spreading in front of her eyes. "Who is it?" After a while, Princess Shanning realized what had happened. She pouted and said discontentedly, "I practiced several times according to teacher's instructions." Chapter 400. As a viscount who was both important and insignificant, Li Yi's departure didn't have much impact on the capital. The biggest change he had made in the capital was to make all the females in the capital crazy. The appearance of perfume and the expansion of production made him the man behind the back of countless young girls and young women in the capital. It also made countless men gnash their teeth in hatred. Because of the high price of perfume, the speed at which new perfume was introduced was astonishing. Even if it was the same perfume, it could be put in different porcelain bottles of different sizes, and even the name could be different. As for those crazy fans, they wouldn't stop until they collected all the series of gifts given to women by the heavens. It was fine for those who were well off, but those who were a bit shy would naturally hate perfume to the extreme. Of course, this kind of hatred was often reduced a lot when they smelled the nice fragrance of their wives, especially at a special, harmonious moment. The effect of perfume was too obvious. The emperor's concubines were also women, and women couldn't resist the temptation of perfume. The direct result was that the emperor only stayed in the palace of the empress and concubine Yin for 2 whole months, because in the entire harem, only the empress and concubine Yin didn't use perfume. As for the other concubines, His Majesty wouldn't look for them anyway, so the result would be the same whether they used perfume or not. Of course, the most important thing was to be happy. Because of Li Yi's departure, the princes and princesses in the palace could finally get rid of those obscure numbers and symbols and completely let themselves go. Among them, Prince Jean was the most successful. At most, the other princes were more lively than before. Prince Jean, who was tortured by the mathematics teacher, waited for 2 months, but the hateful mathematics teacher didn't come back. Finally, like a wild dog or a pig that got out of the fence, he not only tore the mathematics textbook to pieces and burned it, but also pinched Yongning's face as revenge. Although Yongning would never fight back, made him feel very unfulfilled. When he thought about how he was targeted because he bullied Yongning, how he was hung on the stage because he couldn't write an answer, and how he lost face in front of his brothers and sisters, Prince Jean felt that everything was meaningful. The naive young man obviously didn't have a long-term plan, and he didn't know that the nightmare he thought had not ended, but had not yet begun. Until many years later, when the dean of the Institute of Mathematics of the Jinghua Academy of Sciences, who once fought against all the PhD students in the Imperial College of Mathematics without losing, loudly said, "I'm not saying that you're garbage, I mean, everyone here is garbage." This classic sentence, when Prince Jean recalled his childhood, he still couldn't forget the fear of being dominated by mathematics. Viscount Mansion, Ear and Rui have been gone for 2 months. Why aren't they back yet? The old lady of the Li family was sitting in the yard with a needle and thread in her hand. She was making a small dress. The blind old lady of the He family also looked a little envious and said, "If only I'd been blinded a little later, I would have been able to see what they look like." I would have been able to make clothes for their children like my old sister. The old lady of the Lee family smiled and said, I'm also idle. While I can still see, I'll make a few more. I missed the child 20 years ago, and I can't miss it this time. The old lady of the He family nodded and said, I have nothing to think about in my life. I just want to see Yunyang's child have a child as soon as possible. At that time, even if I die, I can close my eyes well. The two old ladies chatted while basking in the sun. Naturally, the topic was Li Yi and Rui, or their children. A little farther away from the two old ladies, in a place with better sunlight, a kind-looking old man was lying on a rocking chair. His face showed a comfortable expression, and he snorted slightly from time to time. In the accounting room, Uncle Lee was calculating the accounts one by one. Now, he was able to maintain his composure in the face of the huge numbers. He thought to himself that at this rate, it wouldn't be long before the family would have to build another house to store the money. Outside the mansion, Fong was supervising the craftsmen to build houses. More than a dozen houses that were about to be completed were scattered on both sides of the Viscount mansion. He looked around and found that no craftsmen were slacking off. He casually sat on the stone steps at the door with a depressed expression on his face. More than a month ago, after he came to the capital from Qing and mansion with everyone, he learned that the son-in-law and the young lady had returned to Qing mansion. For more than a month, he had been doing these boring things every day, and his heart was really depressed. Zhuzi secretly ate sweets and broke his teeth. All day long, his cheeks were swollen, and he cried for his parents. His wife at home now forbade him to eat candied haws again. Several women discussed and soon moved the candied haws business to the streets of the capital. Now, every day was busy, and only he was relatively idle. He began to miss the old days. Even if he ran up and down the mountain every day, selling Rui nectar and playing with the terrifying things of the son-in-law to kill the outlaws, it was still much more interesting than his current life. Of course, after coming to the capital, he would never be able to see Miss Xiaohong again. Old Fong let out a long sigh and stared blankly at the azure sky. The pure white clouds gradually transformed into the appearance of a round-faced woman. Yuezhou was one of the provinces of the Jing Kingdom. It was famous for its dangerous mountains and rivers, and it was next to Qing and Mansion. At this time, on the official road from Yuezhou to Qing and Mansion, a carriage was slowly moving forward. The driver was a young woman. She was dressed in a tight outfit and leaned against the carriage. In her hands, she was holding a strange picture book that she bought when she passed by a place. However, she did not flip through it for a long time. Her pretty face revealed a hint of laziness as she listened to the sounds coming from inside the carriage. The inside of the carriage was very spacious. It should be quite spacious for 4 or 5 people to sit inside. At this time, a young woman with 2 buns of hair was resting her cheeks in her hands as she listened to the mysterious stories of sword immortals flying on swords. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly rang out. In the middle of the road, a thick tree trunk blocked the road, sending up a cloud of dust. The woman's eyebrows slightly moved. She put down the picture book in her hands and looked forward. Not long after, a rustling sound came from the side of the dense forest. Immediately, a strong man wearing coarse hemp clothes jumped out from the side and blocked the front of the carriage. He fiercely said, "This mountain was planted by me. Bah! This mountain was planted by me. This tree. The expression on the burly man's face was a little awkward. This was the first time he had done something like this. He was illiterate, and he had to ask several people before he managed to ask about the official language of robbery. However, at this most important moment, he was so nervous that he completely forgot about it. This mountain was planted by me. This tree was planted by me. If you want to pass through, you have to pay for the road." The woman in the tight outfit jumped down from the carriage and glared at the man. She crossed her arms and reminded him. The man's face revealed a look of realization. He slapped his forehead and said loudly, "Yes, this mountain was planted by me. This tree is mine. It's me. What's mine again?" Chapter 401. I don't care. The man was obviously not very good at memorizing. After just 4 sentences, He scratched his head hard but still couldn't remember. He shook his head angrily and looked at the woman, saying, "As long as you hand over 10 taels of silver, I won't make things difficult for you." "First time as a bandit?" The young woman glanced at the man and asked indifferently. "Yes." The man scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Why are you doing this?" "To buy medicine for my brother's illness." "Just you?" "Just me." The burly man answered a few words and suddenly realized that something was wrong. It took him a while to realize that he was here to rob, not to be interrogated. He said angrily, "Stop talking nonsense and take out the silver, otherwise." He sat down on the tree in the middle of the road and said, "Or else you won't be able to get through here today." Whoosh! The burly man suddenly felt a cold light appear in front of him. In the next moment, the tree trunk beneath him broke into 2 halves, causing his body to stagger and directly sit on the ground. When he reacted, a long sword was already on his neck. The woman looked down at him and said, "How can you be a bandit if you can't even speak properly?" The man looked wronged. It was also his first time in this business. It was already very good for him to be able to recite a few sentences from his first job. "You can speak properly when you have memorized it," the woman said coldly. "I opened this mountain, this tree is mine. This tree is planted by me. If you want to pass, stay. This mountain is opened by me. This tree is planted by me. Well, why don't you leave? I don't want the silver." The man looked wronged and tears were about to flow down his face. Xiao Huan opened the curtain and looked at the man who was squatting on the ground with his hands on his head. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Young master, this bandit is so stupid." Li Yi couldn't agree more. The bandit in front of him looked like a half-baked gangster. Not only had he not received any formal education, but he had also not read A Bandit's Self-Cultivation, Basic Etiquette for Highway Robbery, and How to Speak Fluent Mandarin. It seemed that there was something wrong with his head. However, Mississippi Lou was bullying him by making him hold his head and squat there to memorize. However, when she thought about it, it was normal. She could be vague about other things, but she absolutely had zero tolerance for fake mountain thieves who try to bluff their way through. When the man was finally able to recite the most basic sentence, he finally looked like a bandit. Mississippi Lou then asked him to move the tree trunks on the road, and the carriage started moving again. Through the window at the back, Li Yi saw that the man was still following closely behind. "I've already given you the money. Why aren't you leaving?" Li Yi opened the window a crack and said, as the man chased after the carriage, he said in a loud voice, "You're going to Qing Prefecture, right? I'll escort you there. I won't take the money. When I have money, I'll definitely return the money you gave me." Li was amused by this guy. What kind of bandit would want to return the money after taking it? This is the money you stole with your own ability. Why do you want to return it? The man was clearly confused by Li Yi's words. After thinking for a long time, he rubbed the back of his head and said, "It's not with my ability. I can't beat you. You're good people. I'll escort you to Qing in Prefecture." "You already said you can't beat us. Why do we need you to escort us?" Li Yi realized that this man was a bit of a one-track mind. It felt weird to have someone like this following beside the carriage. "Even if I don't escort you, I still want to go to Qing in Prefecture." The man gave a simple and honest smile and said, "Because my family is from Qing in Prefecture. In today's society, even such a simple and honest man knew how to play tricks." The world's morals were deteriorating day by day, and people's hearts were not what they used to be. Li Yi lowered the window. He gave up when he was tired and continued to tell Xiao Huan about the legend of the Sword Immortals. Occasionally, he would look out the window. When the official road became smoother and the carriage was less bumpy, it meant that they had entered the territory of Qing in Prefecture. He had not expected that it would take them 2 whole months to go from the capital to Qing in Prefecture. On this journey, they had passed through countless prefectures and prefectures. They had thoroughly experienced what it was like to travel as a family. Other than the carriage, there was no other convenient means of transportation. Because they were going sightseeing, they naturally eliminated the possibility of taking a boat. They did not completely follow the waterway. They walked and stopped along the way, almost seeing all the scenery along the way. Of course, in these 2 months, he had brought 3 first-class beauties through the streets. In these 2 months, they had encountered a lot of trouble. Without going through it personally, it was impossible to know how chaotic the other deserted places, other than Qing and Prefecture and the capital, were. In 2 months, they had encountered bandits and horse thieves no less than 10 times. Of course, there were not many of these bandits. At most, there were only a few dozen of them. Rui didn't even need to do anything. Rui could kill them all by herself with her sword. Even Xiao Huan, who was a little afraid at the beginning, could face the bandits with a smile after a few robberies and discuss with Li Yi what to eat for supper. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not bring a single guard when he traveled. With a wife and sister-in-law like this, where couldn't he go in this big world? Apart from this, the most serious incident was when they passed by a certain province. The son of the provincial governor's family molested a girl on the street and spoke rudely to second young Miss Liu. She crippled him with a single strike of her sword, and the 4 of them were surrounded by nearly 100 soldiers. That time, Li didn't bother second young Miss Liu to do anything. For official matters, he only needed a token to settle it. In the end, the provincial governor even apologized and gave him a generous gift. This made Li Yi feel that the old emperor was actually quite generous. With a token in hand, the experience of having the world at his disposal wasn't bad. As the saying goes, the mountain in sight runs the horse to death. This saying was completely true. The short distance on the map could not be reached no matter how hard they tried. In the end, they could only pick up the pace and finally officially set foot on the land of Qing in Prefecture today. When he returned, he would suggest to the old emperor that the person who drew this map should be hung up and beaten. The scale was seriously out of balance. If they relied on this kind of map to fight, they wouldn't need to worry about how brave the enemy would be. They would kill themselves. Benefactor, you must have traveled a long way, right? The burly man sat cross-legged outside the carriage and asked Li Yi with a silly smile. Seeing this fellow chase after the carriage for 2 hours and still not gasping for breath, Li Yi was very impressed by this fellow's physique. He nodded and said, "From the capital." "The capital? That's very, very far. I heard that the emperor lives in the capital. The houses in the palace are all built with gold." The burly man said with a face full of surprise, "I've never been to the capital. My big brother told me all this." Li Yi took Mississippi Lou's place and came out for some fresh air. Hearing the burly man's words, he thought to himself that the old emperor was not so extravagant. Along the way, he saw many people rushing in the same direction on the official road. Puzzled, he asked, "What's going on up ahead?" The burly man chuckled and said, "Benefactor, you probably don't know about this, but these people are all heading towards the Chun family ditch. There's a newly built brothel there. No, I think it's called a theater or something, but it's all the same. There's a big show inside. You can go in for 2 copper coins, but you can only stand and watch for 2 copper coins. I've only gone in once. Oh my God, that female ghost is so scary." At the mention of the theater, the burly man seemed to have turned on a chatterbox. He talked nonstop to Li Yi and said, "Speaking of this theater, it's amazing. It's opened all over Qing and Prefecture. The shows inside are amazing. Female ghosts, white snakes. I've never seen them before. There's even an arena in the theater for those martial arts masters to fight in. There's some ranking list of martial arts masters. Watching them fight is even better than watching a big show. The only problem is that there are too many people around, so I can't squeeze in." The burly man talked nonstop as if he didn't know fatigue. However, when he was talking about these things, he always had a faint smile on his face. Before he left, he completely handed over the matters of the theater to Old Man's son and Wan Ruoqing. At that time, he told them not to rush to expand and to wait until everything was stable before slowly developing. Unexpectedly, in just 2 months, the theater in their hands had grown to such a scale. Chapter 402. The bare-shouldered girl let out a long yawn and climbed out of bed. Through the window, she saw that the sun had already risen to the middle of the sky. It was all because she had slept too late last night. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gotten up at this time. She rolled around on the bed and saw the familiar figure still sitting in front of the table, frowning and writing something on a piece of paper from time to time. The girl jumped out of bed and exclaimed in surprise, "Sister Ruaching, you didn't sleep last night again." The woman turned around and saw the girl sitting on the bed in an indecent posture. She pointed at the girl's undergarment that had slipped halfway down and turned back to write on a piece of paper. "There are some things that need to be taken care of, and the personnel arrangements for the newly built theaters haven't been decided yet. I've thought about it for one night, and it'll be over soon." The girl on the bed didn't wear any shoes or socks. She walked over barefoot, wearing only an undergarment and undergarments. She lay on Xiaozhu's back and hooked her arms around her neck. "But he can't stay up all night. When we left, he told me to take good care of you." "No, I won't listen to you next time. I'll go to sleep first. I'll tie you up on the bed before midnight." Wan Ruaching put down her pen and moved Xiaozhu's hand away. The two lumps of pressure on her back became even more obvious. She shook her head and said, "You're a big girl now. How can a big girl run on the ground with an undergarment on? Hurry up and put on some clothes. It won't be good if other people see. There are no outsiders here. What are you afraid of?" The girl reluctantly climbed down from Wan Ruaching's back, walked to the head of the bed, and began to slowly put on her clothes. At this time, another figure walked in from outside the door. The girl looked up and turned a deaf ear to it. She adjusted her doo-doo as if she didn't see it. Zhang Zumo glanced at the girl and no longer looked at her. She put a bowl of hot porridge in front of Wan Ruaching and said, "Who can see you work so hard? Your body is about to collapse. Is it worth it?" Wan Ruaching smiled and said, "It's not as serious as you make it out to be. It's just that there are a lot of things happening these days. I'll be fine once I get through it. What are you cooking? Finish this bowl of porridge and go to sleep." Zhang Zumo put away the papers on the table and said after a pause, "I was in the theater just now and overheard some constables chatting. Constable Liu sent a letter from the capital." Arrestor Liu was, of course, Liu Yi. Under Li Yi's special instructions, he had helped the theater a lot, including Zhang Zumo's rise in fame, which attracted the covetous attention of several rich young masters. He was also the one who helped them deal with it. Although the two girls didn't have much communication with him, he was the person they were most familiar with in the county government. About 2 months ago, County Magistrate Liu of Anxi County was transferred to the capital. It was said that he was promoted. It was a sensational event in Qing, in prefecture. Even they had heard about it. Arrestor Liu left with the county magistrate. Fortunately, the bailiffs in the county government have been taking good care of the theater. Not only did they deal with several groups of ruffians who caused trouble, but they also made the theater the focus of their patrols. However, Wan Ruaching still did not understand what Arrestor Liu's letter from the capital city had to do with them. Arrestor Liu mentioned that person in the letter. Do you want to hear it? When speaking of that person, there was a touch of anger in Zhang Zumo's tone. As the biggest winner of the theater, he walked away and left all these chores to a weak woman. As the scale of the theater continued to expand, Zhang Zumo could see how hard it had been for Wan Ruaching in the past few months. She had become a lot more haggard, so she was naturally full of resentment towards Li Yi. Of course, it could not be ruled out that there were other reasons for the resentment. Perhaps the resentment began to accumulate since he left without saying goodbye a few months ago, and it had only reached its peak now. Wan Ruaching had been busy since last night, and she was actually a little hungry. She sipped the porridge. Hearing Zhang Zumo's words, the expression on her face changed, but she didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. He has been conferred the title of nobility. Now he is living a good life in the capital. I'm afraid he won't come back. What's the use of doing these things? Even Zhang Zumo herself didn't realize that when she said this, her tone had become different from usual. Xiaozhu put on her clothes, looked at the two people in the room, stuck out her tongue, and quietly left. Wan Ruaching put down the spoon and said after a while, "People have to do something. It's not this, it's that. Doing these things can make more people have food to eat. I also like it very much." Zhang Zumo asked angrily, "Do you believe these words yourself? What about you?" Wan Ruaching raised her head and looked at her seriously. In the room, The atmosphere began to fall into a long silence. "It's none of my business." After a long time, Zheng Zumo said angrily, turned around, and walked out. Wan Ruoqing smiled helplessly, walked to the bed, and lay down. The moment she touched the pillow, sleepiness swept over her. The next scene is about to begin. Let them control the time. How is the script rehearsal of a Chinese ghost story going? Fu, go and keep an eye on them. Don't let them slack off. The list of martial arts masters can't be delayed. Several arenas need timely feedback. Got it. I'll ask Miss Wan about this later. In a theater that had just been built, Old Man Sun took a sip of tea. Only then did he feel that his smoky throat was much better. In the whole Qing and prefecture, there were now more than 20 theaters scattered in various places. The daily affairs were so complicated that he had no time to tell stories. Especially these theaters that had just been built and were still in the initial stage, they couldn't leave him. At this moment, he finally understood what County Magistrate Li said to him when he left Qing and prefecture. He thought he was conservative enough. He didn't expect that he didn't underestimate the market, but overestimated his own energy. Sure enough, as there were more and more theaters, many problems appeared. If it weren't for Miss Ruoqing helping him with most of the affairs, he was afraid that his old bones would end here. However, these chores were only a part of Old Sun's worries. Although the theater was constantly developing, the popularity of the strange stories from a Chinese studio series and Legend of the White Snake was gradually declining. Although under the guidance of County Magistrate Li, things that were extended around the list of martial arts masters could already keep the theater open for a long time. Once they lost a good script, some ideas in his mind could only go so far. In addition, there were more difficult problems that were gradually pressing on. After County Magistrate Liu left Qing, in prefecture, Arrestor Liu Yi also left. They had lost their biggest support, the newly appointed county magistrate. A few days ago, he had finally seen the profits of the brothel. After he had hinted a few times, but Liu Yi pretended not to know, he had finally begun to suppress them to varying degrees. This matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. With decades of experience, he knew better than anyone how many ways the government could stop a brothel from operating normally. He didn't know Old Sun's worries. At this time, he had just arrived at the city gate. Sitting outside the carriage, he looked at the familiar tall city wall and felt a sense of familiarity. Qing, in prefecture, finally back. Chapter 403. Naturally, Li Yi's feelings for Qing and prefecture could not be compared to those in the capital. Even though the capital was more prosperous than here, there was no Willow Village, no Ruyi Square, no brothel, no theater, and even the name of a brothel was not as pleasing to the ear as the Jade Courtyard. After 2 months of traveling, he had had enough fun, but it was also very tiring. Right now, he only wanted to quickly return home, lie on that familiar bed, and have a good sleep. The carriage went straight through the city gate. Li didn't know how many times he had walked this street. After 2 or 3 months, even the roadside vendors hadn't changed much. Li even saw Niyo in a constable's uniform wandering on the road. The door of the Ruyi Square was tightly shut. The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door moved a chair and sat in front of the shop. He continued to sigh about the poor business in the shop. Everything was the same as when he left. The honest man left halfway, so Li had to drive himself. The carriage finally stopped in front of a large house. There were no adults at the door, but a few children were playing. Elder Fong had left the capital city a step earlier than them to pick up the people here. Now that 2 months had passed, they had probably arrived in the capital city a long time ago. However, this place did not seem to be uninhabited, and they did not know why. Seeing Li and the others get out of the carriage, the children immediately stopped playing and hid behind the door. When they saw them coming inside, they immediately scattered and ran deeper into the courtyard. Just as the 4 of them stepped into the house, a figure came out to greet them. The girl named Yang Liuqing was slightly startled, and then said with surprise, "Master, uncle, you're back." The room and courtyard were cleaned every day, even cleaner and tidier than when Li left. According to Yang Liuqing, After Fong and the others left, the task of looking after the house was handed over to her and the children. These orphans no longer had to rely on begging for a living. The more honest ones were doing some simple work in the theater. The rest of them were not idle either. The older children led their younger brothers and sisters out to sell candied haws every day. The money they earned was enough to feed all of them, and there was still a surplus. Uncle, after you left, elder son of the theater and the steward of the mansion would send some silver every half a month. It's all here. Yang Liuqing had the boys carry out a few boxes from the room and explained. Li was not surprised that Ning Wang Fu would send money every once in a while. As for the other money, Li remembered that when he left, he had them use it to run the theater. The only person who had the power to decide the ownership of this money was Ruoqing. However, when he came, he heard the man say that elder son and the others had opened theaters all over Qing and prefecture. It seemed that the profits brought in by the theater were more than he had imagined. Under the premise of ensuring continued expansion, there was still so much surplus. He didn't need so much silver at the moment. If there were no accidents, the perfume business with Li Xian and Her Highness in the capital should be doing well. In the future, the silver would only flow into his home. No matter how much he had, it wouldn't be of much use. Originally, he thought that he would have to tidy up after coming back. He didn't expect to have such a diligent martial nephew. Li could lie down and sleep when he returned to the room. In these 2 months, under the guidance of the deceptive map, it wasn't every day that he could coincidentally find Nin. Sometimes, he could only sleep in the wild. Later, Li simply made a few simple tents. But how could a tent be more comfortable than a bed? Even the blanket was just dried. He was too lazy to take off his clothes and shoes and directly lay down. After 2 months of bumpy and wandering, it was rare for him to have such a comfortable moment. After a while, he fell into a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the exhaustion accumulated over the past few days was swept away. He walked out of the room and found that the sky was already a little dark. Yang Liuqing was practicing swordsmanship alone in the courtyard. Although Mississippi Liu still hadn't officially acknowledged her as her disciple, she would occasionally give her a few pointers. Although the two of them weren't master and disciple in name, they were actually master and disciple in reality. Therefore, Li had picked up a martial nephew for free. Although his martial uncle's ability was probably maybe okay, Li admitted that he couldn't beat Yang Liuqing, but who asked him to have a powerful sister-in-law? As for Yang Liuqing, Li still had some appreciation in his heart. It could even be said that he admired her. Among the people he knew, in terms of persistence and diligence, if she was the second, no one could be called the first. In the days when Mississippi Liu didn't agree to accept her as a disciple, she came here early in the morning to clean and left in the evening. She persisted for a long time. Whenever she was free, she could be seen practicing swordsmanship outside. Not only did her frequency far exceed Li Yi's, but even Mississippi Liu was not as good as her. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons why Mississippi Liu changed her original intention. Seeing Li coming out of the room, Yang Liuqing hurriedly stopped and said, "Master and martial uncle have returned to Willow Village. They asked me to wait for you to wake up and tell you." Li nodded, indicating that he understood. Willow Village was the place where Rui and the others grew up. Of course, they had to visit this time when they came back. Even Xiaohuan had mentioned it many times along the way. They might not have many opportunities to come back in the future. On the way here, they had agreed to go back to the village and stay for a few days. Willow Village carried too much weight for them. This was the childhood memory of the 3 sisters. Li didn't want to join in the fun. He slept for a long time and was a little hungry. He planned to go out and find something to eat. He used to walk the road from the house to Rui Workshop, and now it was no exception. Rui Workshop wasn't open, and Li didn't intend to cook by himself. He entered from the entrance of the wall market and walked to the door of a courtyard. He found that the door was actually not closed. Li gently pushed the door and went in. There was a faint light coming from inside the room. He was going to go in, but suddenly it seemed that he smelled something. He sniffed, and the next moment, his face immediately showed an expression of surprise. He didn't choose to go straight, but turned into a small room on the side. After entering, he found that it was the kitchen. At this time, it was getting darker. Although it wasn't completely dark, it was still difficult to see clearly. Fortunately, what he was looking for was not difficult to find. He followed the smell and opened a food box on the table. The long-lost familiar smell immediately became strong. Osmanthus cake. It was like the osmanthus cake made by Ruwaching. He would never forget this taste. He was already a little hungry, so he couldn't wait to pinch a piece, then a second, a third, a fourth. At this time, all of Li's attention was on the food in front of him. He didn't realize that a delicate figure had quietly come behind him. Looking at the dark shadow in the kitchen, the girl showed a frightened expression on her face. She held the wooden stick in her hand tightly and quietly approached the dark shadow. "There's a thief." This was the first feeling in her heart. He came in without saying a word and hid in the kitchen sneakily. Who else could it be but a thief? As long as she shouted a few times, someone next door would hear it and rush over to catch the little thief and send him to the government. However, before that, she had to teach this bold guy a good lesson. Finally, she walked to the dark shadow with his back facing her. The girl gritted her teeth, raised the wooden stick in her hand, and swung it at the little thief. Chapter 404. Although the girl's strength was not great, when she used all her strength, the wooden stick cut through the air and made a sound of wind. Li picked up the osmanthus cake with one hand and suddenly reached behind him with the other hand, grabbing the wooden stick with great precision in the dark. Mississippi Lou's previous devilish training was very effective, making his skills a lot better than in his previous life. He couldn't beat a martial arts master, but he could deal with a weak girl. The girl didn't seem to expect the little thief's reaction to be so fast. Her attack missed, and she subconsciously opened her mouth to scream. However, when she opened her mouth, a piece of osmanthus cake was stuffed in her mouth before the sound came out. "What are you screaming for in the middle of the night?" Li said impatiently, and took a step toward the light outside. The sky was not completely dark yet, and standing outside, he could vaguely see the appearance. He thought that after Xiao Zhu saw him, even if she didn't jump excitedly, she wouldn't use the stick to greet him. But after a moment of shock, she shouted in a more shrill voice, "Ghost!" In the dark, the expression on Li Yi's face froze, and a few black lines appeared on his forehead. "Brother Dong, Uncle Wong, it's really nothing. It's just that I accidentally sprained my ankle when I was walking just now. I'm sorry for causing you trouble," Xiao Zhu explained to the two people standing outside the door apologetically. "It's no trouble." The kind middle-aged man looked into the room and asked, "Where's Miss Ruwaching? Is there really nothing at home?" Xiao Zhu said, "Sister Ruwaching is in the room. There's really nothing wrong." Xiao Zhu explained for a long time, and then the middle-aged man dispelled the doubts in his heart and said, "If there's anything, just shout, and we'll come immediately." After sending the two people away with great difficulty, Xiao Zhu closed the door and quickly ran into the room. At the same time, Li also finished the last piece of osmanthus cake. "Is it really you?" She walked around Li twice and asked suspiciously. Today, she had heard from Zue Mo that he was living a good life in the capital, that he had been conferred a noble title, that he was a high-ranking official, and so on. Yet, she saw him stealing things from the kitchen at night. Xiao Zhu couldn't believe it no matter how hard she tried, which was why she had screamed earlier. "Apart from me, does anyone else know that you were bitten by a dog when you were a child?" When Li Yi was sunbathing in the courtyard behind the Rui workshop, he often chatted with Xiao Zhu, who climbed up the wall, so it was very easy to prove his identity. Hearing this, the suspicion on Xiao Zhu's face disappeared, but quickly turned into anger. "You still know to come back." Hearing this, Li Yi was startled and couldn't react for a moment. What did he mean by, "he knew to come back"? Looking at her expression again, there was disappointment mixed with anger, like a little wife who had caught her husband fooling around outside at night, and all the emotions of grievance were written all over her face. Li Yi's heart was full of doubts, but her emotions didn't seem fake. For a moment, He even suspected, before he left Qing in prefecture, that he had lost another particularly important memory. What happened to me? Thinking of this, even his words became strangely guilty. Xiao Zhu sat down angrily across from him and asked, "Do you know, how did Sister Watching get through these days?" How did she get through? Li Yi thought. Why did it bring up her watching again? Could it be in a memory that he had lost? The main character was someone else? Even if it was amnesia, it should be a memory from half a year ago. The plot couldn't be so complicated and bizarre, right? Chen Yuzhu looked at Li Yi and said angrily, "These 2 months, Sister Ruoqing hasn't slept well at all. Do you know, because of those things in the brothel, she didn't sleep at all last night, and today she slept for less than an hour. She has lost a lot of weight. Didn't I remind you several times before I left to take good care of Miss Ruoqing, to let her pay attention to rest and not overwork?" Li Yi looked at her and said, "Don't tell me you didn't get this allowance." He knew Wan Ruoqing worked very hard, and when he left, he specifically told Xiao Zhu that when necessary, the matter of the brothel could be put aside, and taking good care of her body was the most important. He had reminded her of this more than once, and even specially paid her a salary. Now she was blaming him. Xiao Zhu was speechless for a moment, because what Li Yi said was the truth, but how could she change what Sister Ruoqing had decided? In short, it was still his fault. "I don't care. The brothel is yours. You think of a way." The young girl pouted and didn't intend to reason with Li Yi, with a look of "I am cute, I am right." Li did not intend to reason with Xiao Zhu. Only now did he understand why the brothel business had developed so quickly in just a short 2 to 3 months. Wan Ruoqing had even forgotten to eat and sleep because of this, and he, as the shopkeeper, felt a little guilty. "Where's Miss Ruoqing now?" Li stood up and asked. "Inside." Xiao Zhu pointed to the room with the light on and said doubtfully, "Strange. We were talking so loudly outside. Sister Ruoqing should have heard us long ago. Why hasn't she come out yet?" Li Yi and Xiao Zhu opened the curtain and walked in and saw a figure leaning over the table. Even in her sleep, Ruoqing was frowning slightly, as if she had encountered something troublesome. She looked far more haggard than the last time Li Yi saw her, and although her beauty hadn't decreased, there was a hint of poignant beauty in her. These days, it was as Xiao Zhu said, she really did forget to eat and sleep, otherwise she wouldn't be so thin. "Sure, Sister Ruoqing is asleep, don't disturb her." The young girl made a shushing gesture to him. Li nodded and walked over slowly. There were some papers neatly stacked on the table, and the handwriting on them was very elegant, familiar hairpin-style, small, regular script. Li Yi picked up a few of them and looked at them. They were about the specific arrangements of each brothel. There were many of these papers. She couldn't have been handling all the trifling matters by herself all the time. Could she? Her hands were half in the air, and her head was leaning on the table, exhaustion written all over her face. Seeing her eyelashes tremble a few times, as if she was about to open her eyes, Li Yi reached out and touched a spot on the back of her neck. "What are you doing?" Xiao Zhu ran to the front, looking at him warily. "She needs a good rest now. I just touched her sleep point." Li Yi walked to the chair, looked at her, and said impatiently, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and help her." In fact, the young girl didn't have much strength, so she couldn't help much. Li Yi almost carried her to the bed by himself and covered her with the quilt. That light touch just now, she wouldn't wake up until the next morning. When Wan Ruoqing fainted in front of Rui brothel, he had also carried her, and this time he found that she was much lighter than before. "She won't wake up until tomorrow morning. I'll take these things on the table. Take good care of her." Li picked up the stack of things, looked at Ruoqing again, and walked out of the room. Watching Li Yi's figure disappear outside the door, the young girl curled her lips and said in a low voice, "You know how to care for Sister Ruoqing. At least you have some conscience." Chapter 405. The osmanthus cake could barely fill one's stomach, but it was not enough. Not far from Rui Lane, there was a noodle stall. Li Yi and Xiao Huan used to frequent it. He didn't expect the noodle woman to still be there. Li ate another bowl of noodles. The woman didn't speak much and didn't seem to recognize that he used to be a regular customer of the noodle stall. She had many customers every day, and it was difficult to remember one or two. After finishing the noodles and returning home, he lit the lamp and sat at the table. He took out the things he got from watching and carefully flipped through them. The handwriting on the paper was elegant and the content clear. Lee didn't have to spend much effort to have a comprehensive understanding of the current situation of the theater. There were about 20 theaters in Qing and prefecture, with the prefecture as the center and extending outwards. Because of the lack of manpower, it had almost reached the limit of expansion. As for the Jianghu and Wulin, they were all handled by Old Man Sunday. The authority of the Wulin hero ranking increased day by day. There were even some brothels outside the city that provided arenas for all kinds of masters to compete for rankings. The masters participating there were free of charge, but the spectators had to pay a certain fee. Of course, no one was short of a few copper coins. Many people felt that watching two people fight on the stage was much more interesting than watching a group of people perform. Therefore, there was no lack of spectators for every competition, and the profits could not be ignored. It wasn't easy to develop to this point in 2 months. No one knew better than Li how powerful this force was. Of course, the current development of the brothel had reached a bottleneck. If they wanted to keep the customers, they had to continuously innovate and have better stories and scripts. Fortunately, he still had to stay in Qing and prefecture for a while longer. Taking advantage of this time, he could bring out the legendary cultural crystals. He had slept enough during the day and didn't feel tired. He took out a brush and paper. Xiao Huan wasn't there, so he could only grind the ink himself. After a while, Li raised the brush and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a thick book that others couldn't see floated in front of him. On the front page were 3 big words: Journey to the West. Before the chaos was divided, the world was in chaos and no one could see it. Ever since Pangu broke the primordial world and created the distinction between pure and turbid, as a few lines of small words appeared on the paper, the story of a monkey officially opened a new chapter in this strange world. In the courtyard next door, the girl's body moved about, using the moonlight to practice her swordsmanship. She would look up from time to time. Even when she was about to rest, the lights were still on. The moment Wan Ruoqing opened her eyes, she was stung by the sunlight shining through the window. She covered her eyes with her hand and sat up on the bed with a trace of doubt on her face. If she remembered correctly, she only wanted to take a nap on the table for a quarter of an hour. How did she end up lying on the bed? Moreover, the sky was clearly turning dark at that time. Why did it suddenly light up now? Was it an illusion? For her, from the time she laid on the table to the time she woke up on the bed, it seemed that only a quarter of an hour had passed. At this moment, her mind was still a little dazed. "You're awake." Just as she was trying to make her mind clear as soon as possible, a muffled voice suddenly came from the direction of the room door. Li held a stuffed bun wrapped in paper in his hand and one in his mouth. Seeing that Wan Ruoqing had woken up, he gestured to her and said, "I just bought these buns with cabbage fillings. Do you want 2? Wan Ruoqing looked at him in a daze. Her face was filled with amazement and shock. For a moment, she was unable to come back to her senses. After a while, she nodded and said, Then I'll have one." He was very clear on how long it would take for a person to wake up after their acupuncture point was hit. Therefore, when he came early in the morning, he bought breakfast for 2. Wan Ruoqing washed up for a long time before appearing in front of Li again. She did not have any makeup on, and her face was bare. She seemed to be in better spirits than last night. For a woman, someone who could meet her without makeup must have treated her as a true friend. Li was very pleased about this, although he could not tell what had changed on her before and after putting on makeup. "Sorry, I didn't know that you don't eat cabbage buns. Xiaozhu has already gone out to buy new ones." Just now, when Wan Ruoqing was washing up in the room, Xiaozhu took a steamed bun and nibbled on it. When she realized that it was stuffed with cabbage, she told Li that Wan Ruoqing never ate steamed buns with this kind of stuffing. She then went out to buy breakfast again. Actually, Li did not like cabbage buns very much. Unfortunately, he had stayed up all night, copying books, and got up a little late in the morning. The bun shop had sold out the other fillings, so he had no other choice. Wan Ruoqing smiled and took a bite of a bun. After a while, she looked up at him and asked, "You? When did you come back?" "Yesterday." He wiped his hands and said, "I came here last night. You were asleep at the time, so I didn't wake you up." Wan Ruoqing somewhat regretted not insisting a little longer yesterday, but she quickly changed the topic and said, "The theater." Seeing that she was going to talk about the theater, Li waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about the theater for now. Rest well in the next few days. I'll take care of those things." The things he did related to the theater were only because he did not want to see the brothel close down at the time. He did not think about how big or how good it was. Although his thinking was different now, he could not make Ruoqing work so hard just because of this. Wan Ruoqing nibbled on the bun and did not know what to say for a moment. They had not seen each other for more than 2 months. She thought she would have a lot to say, such as asking how he was doing in the capital and if he would not come back in the future. However, when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she did not say them in the end. "I advise you to let it go. That person is having fun in the capital. Maybe he has long forgotten about the things here." Zheng Zimo walked in from outside with a food box in her hand. She would persuade Wan Ruoqing like this several times a day, but today she closed her mouth before she finished speaking. Looking at the back of the figure sitting across from Wan Ruoqing, a trace of doubt and disbelief quickly flashed through her eyes. A moment later, Li took a sip of the porridge Zheng Zimo brought over with a spoon. He looked up at her and asked, "By the way, what did you say about having fun?" "Nothing." Seeing his indifferent look, Zheng Zimo gritted her teeth and said, "Where did you buy the porridge today?" Li suddenly asked, "What?" Zheng Zimo turned to look at him, feeling a little nervous for no reason. "Don't go to that store in the future. You can't even control the heat of ordinary porridge. Sooner or later, you will have to close, eat it, or leave it." Zheng Zimo snatched the bowl from Li Yi's hand, put it back in the food box, and walked out angrily. "What's wrong with her?" Li looked at Wan Ruoqing and asked in confusion. He did not offend her in any way today. Could it be that she was still holding a grudge over that misunderstanding? The first time they met was like this. Li felt that the boat of friendship between the two might be overturned. Wan Ruoqing pondered for a moment and said, "Nothing. It's just that the porridge just now was made by Zimo herself." Chapter 406. Maybe it's because of the 2 cabbage buns just now that affected my taste. Li gulped down the plain porridge and said, "From a gourmet point of view, it's best not to eat anything messy before tasting delicious food. This porridge is very good. It would be nice if there was another plate of pickled vegetables or pickled cucumbers." Without participation, there was no right to speak. If this porridge was sold, it would be fine. He could judge it after spending money. It was not the behavior of a gentleman to eat and drink someone else's porridge and complain that it tasted bad. Although Li Yi's definition of himself was not a gentleman, in order to save the boat of friendship between him and Zheng Zimo that was on the verge of collapse, he could only speak against his conscience. If Mississippi Liu was sent by God to go against him, making Li feel that he owed her something in his previous life that needed to be repaid in this life, then Li was extremely suspicious that Zheng Zimo had done something wrong to him in his previous life that caused him to ruin her things unintentionally every time. Before the two met, because of his negligence, he made a big mistake on the portrait of her and Mississippi Liu. Later, he was dragged to the Jade Courtyard by Li Xian for the first time and ruined her performance. Later, in order to avoid Mississippi Liu, he accidentally broke in her boudoir and saw everything that should not have been seen. In this way, she should have owed him a lot in his previous life. Of course, because of the last thing, when he faced Zheng Zimo, he actually felt a little guilty. In this era, if a man saw a woman's body, in order to keep her chastity, she would either marry him, kill him, or commit suicide. Of course, it was impossible to marry him. Li estimated that with her arrogant personality, she would definitely look down on him. At the same time, for the sake of his and her safety, The probability of the first event happening was 0. However, she neither wanted to kill him, nor did she force him to do so. Not only did she not mention that incident, but she also helped him cover up the embarrassment in front of Mississippi Lou. A real man must take revenge and repay kindness. That was why he sent her poems to help her compete for the top courtesan before he left. However, the whole story had just been learned from one watching. He could only bury his head in the porridge. He didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. If Zhang Zumo hadn't redeemed her freedom before those poems were spread, she might still be in the fire pit of the Jade Yard. She might not even be able to get out for the rest of her life. That was to say, he almost accidentally caused a disaster again. Li Yi secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, Zhang Zumo had foresight. If she had redeemed herself a little later, he really wouldn't have been able to repay the debt in this life other than dedicating himself to her and giving her the only 100 kilograms of flesh he had. So, at that time, she didn't even think about competing for the top courtesan. He was being overly sentimental. Not only did he not repay the favor, but he owed her even more, making her the absolute goddess in the heart of Qing, in prefecture, and even everyone who heard those poems. The star of this era, the national goddess that countless people would spend a lot of money just to see once, was also in constant trouble. Every day, she had to face countless crazy bees and butterflies. She didn't even dare to go out without a mask and sunglasses. Li Yi decided not to speak for the time, being to avoid embarrassment. The white porridge in the bowl was quickly finished. He seized the portion that originally belonged to Xiao Zhu, trying to use eating as an excuse to shut his mouth. The embarrassed expression on Zhang Zumo's face eased slightly. She took this as a way for Li Yi to make amends. "I'm back. It's too late today, and a lot of porridge shops are sold out. I ran half a street to buy it." Xiao Zhu came in with a food box. Seeing that Li Yi was already sitting at the table eating porridge, and then looking at Zhang Zumo sitting across from him, her little face couldn't help but change. However, when she learned that Li Yi had eaten up the portion that originally belonged to her, the smile on her face became bright again. She cast a grateful look at him. Finally, she had a good reason to eat the porridge she bought. In order to resolve the awkwardness between the two, Wan Ruoqing glanced at Zhang Zumo and said to Li, "During this time, Zumo has also helped us a lot. She helped to draw the curtains and backgrounds of some plays." Zhang Zumo's power alone was limited. It was impossible for her to draw all the curtains and backgrounds of the theaters, but that kind of novel and unique painting had also attracted many customers for them. Zhang Zumo curled her lips and said, "It's not really a help. It's just some useless painting. Besides, I get paid for painting those things." Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "A painting of the Luo Shui goddess has been sold for hundreds of taels of silver outside. There's no market for it. We can't afford such a high reward." Zhang Zumo glanced at Li Yi. Speaking of which, the growth of her fame and the improvement of her painting skills were all thanks to him. However, although her paintings were very valuable now, it was nothing more than because they were rare. If they could be bought easily, then what was the difference between them and the common goods on the street? Moreover, she was not short of money at all, and did not need to sell her painstaking efforts. Li Yi was a little full now, but seeing Zhang Zumo's appearance, he knew that the boat would not capsize this time. He suddenly felt that the 2 bowls of porridge just now were the 2 most meaningful bowls of porridge he had ever eaten. He came over in the morning to give the first few chapters of Journey to the West to Wan Ruoqing, so that the storytellers could familiarize themselves with it first. The official serialization would begin tomorrow. At the same time, he hadn't been to the theater for a long time. He wanted to see what the theater was like now. "I'll take you there." The nearest theater was only a few dozen steps away from here. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing walked out of the door and happened to meet a group of people coming from the front. Seeing those people, Zhang Zumo, who was walking at the back, changed her expression. She was about to retreat, but it was too late. "Miss Zumo, what a coincidence!" A young man at the front immediately greeted her and said with a smile, "So this is the Luo Shui goddess." Indeed, seeing is believing. She is indeed a peerless beauty. Miss Zumo, I have set up a banquet at the Agarwood Tower today. I wonder if you can do me the honor. Most of these people were young men. After one of them took the lead, the others came forward one after another, talking politely and attentively. Some of them had seen Zhang Zumo countless times. They tried to please her many times, but she didn't take them seriously. Some of them came purely because of her reputation. They felt that although this Luo Shui goddess was extremely beautiful, she didn't seem to be as exaggerated as described in the poem. She was not much better than this year's champion, Lu Xiaoqiao, and even comparable to the woman next to her. But since she was so famous and almost everyone in Qing and prefecture knew her, there must be a reason. Thinking about it this way, it made them even more curious. Li was also stunned by this sudden scene. It was one thing to hear Wan Ruoqing say it, but it was another thing to see Zhang Zumo's pursuers with his own eyes. Who would have thought that in ancient times, there were fans of their idols who came to stop them? The young man looked talented and seemed to be well-read, but he actually said such a lame reason like, "What a coincidence." Die-hard fans really lowered their intelligence. As for the person who set up the banquet at the Agarwood Tower, who would treat their idols to a meal so casually, they should at least take out thousands of taels of silver to show their sincerity. Seeing the scene in front of him, an idea suddenly emerged in Li Yi's mind. If Zhang Zumo's influence could spread to the capital and then put up a big billboard in front of every perfume shop, with a picture of Zhang Zumo holding a perfume in her hands. It must be three-dimensional, and at the end, add an advertising slogan, XX perfume. Miss Zumo said it was good after using it. In this way, not only would women be unable to refuse, but it would also attract a large number of male customers. The business would be booming. Chapter 407. In this world, no one knew better than Li Yi how powerful the fan effect was. In the past, he thought that because of the background of the era, it was impossible to have a star model like the one in the future. However, seeing this scene today, he realized that this matter seemed to be very promising. Since there was a goddess of Luo Shui, why couldn't there be other goddesses like the goddess of Wei Shui, the goddess of Han, and other goddesses? Of course, it was not easy to promote a national goddess like Zhang Zumo, who had beauty, temperament, and a little luck. However, grassroots stars were closer to life. Sister Osmanthus Cake, Sister Grape Wine, Tofu Beauty, Sister Tongalu, and these civilian goddesses could be achieved with a little hype. If not, he could let the brothel operate, and each state and county would elect a few state and county beauties. Then, he could push out a few newcomers signed by his family. Excellent actors not only relied on acting skills to make a living, but also had extremely high requirements for appearance. With a foundation, the event was held by his family, and the final right of interpretation was also up to him. As for the result, it was nothing more than a matter of going through the process. When he became famous, he could endorse for those rouge, cosmetics, jewelry, and the like, cut ribbons, attend commercial performances, and so on. This was all a business without any cost. By the way, he couldn't let go of the goddess of Luo Shui. He had to sign her first, lest others take advantage of her. She had a good relationship with Wan Ruoqing. When the time came, he could play the emotional card, and the possibility of success was not small. After all, the reputation of the goddess of Luo Shui was ready-made. There was no need to invest any resources. This was a big advantage. Those who always wanted to take advantage of others generally couldn't take advantage of others. Li only understood this after a long time. At this time, he only felt a slight tightness on one arm, and he could feel the softness and smoothness through a layer of clothes. He looked at Zhang Zumo, who came up to take his arm, and his brain was a little confused for a moment. What was going on? Watching the legendary goddess of Luo Shui, Miss Zumo, lead with the young man's arm, everyone stood there in a daze, unable to believe their eyes. Could it be that Miss Zumo was already taken? Except for husband and wife, who would do such a thing in public between a man and a woman? If heartbreak had a sound, Wan Ruoqing and Xiao Zhu would definitely feel that it was particularly noisy around them at this moment. However, they had no time to care about these people now. Seeing Li Yi and Zheng Zimo leave, they hurriedly followed. Only the group of young people remained in the same place. They all had different expressions on their faces, but the one thing they had in common was that the smiles on their faces were no longer there. She hadn't said anything just now, but she had said everything. How is this possible? Who is that person? Why haven't I seen him before? She is Lady Zue Mo, the goddess of Luo Shui. Many people were still unable to accept what they had just seen. Goddesses should exist high up in the clouds. Why did they have to descend to the mortal world all the time? A goddess marrying a man was a huge blow to them. It was likely that many people would leave the fan club because of this. Li was stunned for a moment before he immediately understood what had happened. Of course, Zheng Zimo couldn't have suddenly fallen in love with him and wanted to force a confession. The only explanation was that she wanted to get rid of these crazy bees and butterflies and used him as a shield. However, how could she not ask for his opinion? A shield also had dignity. Don't move. This is all your fault. It should be solved by you. Sensing that Li Yi wanted to pull his hand out, Zheng Zimo whispered, and at the same time, she used some strength in her arm. Li stopped moving around to avoid accidentally touching something he shouldn't. If he moved again in this position, Zheng Zimo would definitely think that he wanted to take advantage of her. Fortunately, they were only a few dozen steps away from the theater. When the two walked in from the back door, Zheng Zimo immediately let go of him. Wan Ruoqing walked over from behind and looked at Zheng Zimo, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She said, "You forget it. This is indeed the most effective way." Seeing that Zheng Zimo was actually looking at him proudly, he was quite speechless. If it was in modern times, it was not uncommon for girls to hug and kiss, let alone hold a shield's hand. This was how it was played in many TV dramas. The shield was generally a standard tall, rich, and handsome man with both looks and wealth. The female lead was a sweet and innocent girl who acted as a play for her ex-boyfriend or ex-boyfriend's current girlfriend or ex-boyfriend's current boyfriend. Then, under a miraculous fate, after 20 or 40 episodes of twists and turns, after experiencing all kinds of setbacks and blows, they would end up together with the original shield, making countless ignorant girls in front of the TV jealous. However, this was not modern times, nor was it an idol drama. Could it be that the shield had already appeared thousands of years ago? Moreover, the goddess of Luo Shui, who was equivalent to an A-list actress in Qing, in prefecture, was not a sweet and innocent girl with zero sense of existence. If there was a female star in the future who dared to do this, the man's ancestors would probably be dug out. On the second day of coming to Qing, in prefecture, Li Yi foresaw the trouble he was about to encounter. However, the most troublesome thing was not Zheng Zimo's suitors, but how he should explain to Rui and Mississippi Lu's sword. Of course, the reason was still because of his decision 3 months ago. At this time, he could only slowly swallow the bitter fruit he had sown. Thank you for your kindness before, but this matter started because of you, so it should be ended by you. Anyway, you will leave soon. When you arrive in the capital, no one will know who Zheng Zimo is. Zheng Zimo turned to look at him, raised a white palm, and said, "After today, our previous grievances are written off." Wan Ruoqing only knew that the two of them had never been on good terms, especially because of those poems. Zheng Zimo had complained a lot in front of her in the past 2 months, although she could clearly see that her complaints were fake. More than once, she had seen her secretly looking at the poetry book with a silly smile. Li Yi knew that she was actually talking about something else. After hesitating for a moment, he also raised his palm. Pa, pa, pa. No, there was only one sound. Pa, a high five as a vowel. Zheng Zimo raised her eyebrows. After giving Li Yi a high five, she turned around and walked further inside. Her footsteps were obviously relaxed. Li Yi shook his slightly numb palm, wondering why she had used so much strength just now. However, he also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the boat had sailed to a calm sea, and there was no need to worry about turning over in a short time. In a room backstage of the theater, Old Sun put aside a stack of newly collected scripts and let out a long sigh. The previous scripts and stories were almost used up now. If it didn't innovate, the theater would gradually become deserted again. He absolutely didn't want to see that. However, the new scripts he saw recently were all old and boring, and none of them could be used. This serious problem was already imminent. However, the lack of a script was only a matter of urgency. There was another matter that was really urgent. The new county magistrate way was obviously not easy to deal with. How could they fight with the county magistrate in the territory of Anshi County after losing their backer? The sound of footsteps came from the door. Old Sun suppressed these emotions, turned his head, looked at the person, and said doubtfully, "Why is Miss Zumo here now?" "Mr. Watching is not here now. I'm afraid you have to go home to find her." Before Zung Zumo answered, two other figures walked in from the door. "Hey, Mr. Watching is here. I happen to have something to talk to you about." Old Sun didn't finish his words. Looking at the young man who walked over side by side with Watching, he was stunned for a moment. The wrinkles on his old face were like blooming chrysanthemums. He said in surprise, "Sir, you're finally back." Chapter 4:08. Old Man Sun had personally witnessed the revival of this brothel and its gradual development to its current state. He could see gratifying changes almost every day, and all of this stemmed from the miraculous means of the person in front of him. As long as he came back, all the problems would be solved. Lack of new stories and scripts, pressure from the local officials. He didn't have to worry about these. Under the guidance of Old Sun and Wan Ruoqing, Li Yi visited all the theaters in and outside the city in the morning. He even sat down with them to watch a few plays. Everything in the theater was orderly and well organized. It was a world of difference from the previous brothel. As the other theaters were too far away, Li Yi didn't have time to visit them. As for the special performances for martial artists, they were far away outside the city. Naturally, he didn't have the chance to see them today. Along the way, Old Sun kept telling him about the development of the theater these days. The reputation of the Qing and prefectural theater had spread far and wide. There were more than 20 theaters, which almost included most of the actors living at the bottom of the society. Even actors from other states and counties came to seek shelter. However, because there were too many people, the theater couldn't accommodate them all. Now, they could only do some chores. As long as they could eat, it was good. Old Sun talked incessantly. All of them are very grateful to you. They hope that we can bring the theater to other states and counties. There are countless actors living in poverty there. In the past, most of these actors worked alone. They built a small shed in Wa City or formed a group. They could only rely on tips to survive. They had the last meal, but they didn't have the next one. They even wandered around the prefectures. Because of their lowly status, they couldn't do anything else. Their profession didn't allow them to live a stable life. Suddenly, there was such a place. They only had to do what they had always been doing. Their food and accommodation were provided, and they were paid a lot. They didn't have to run around. Which actor wouldn't be tempted? The success of the Qing and prefectural theater was due to its high-quality content and scientific management methods. Both of these were things that other people could not learn or had a hard time learning. Thus, they hoped that the spring breeze of the reform of the brothels would blow to where they were and that they would stride into a beautiful new era. It had almost become the common hope of the performers in the nearby counties. At the mention of this matter, the weariness on Old Man Sun's face was swept away, and his muddy old eyes flashed with light. Years later, the actors who had gotten rid of their lowly status and could finally live under the gaze of thousands of people would never forget the words of the kind old man before he died. Life is but once for us, and a man's life should be spent in such a way that when he looks back on his past, he will not be ashamed of wasted years, nor will he be ashamed of meanness and vulgarity, so that at the moment of his death he will be able to say, "All my life and all my energies have been given to the greatest cause in the world, the struggle for the liberation of all actors." That old man was their enlightener, their forerunner. He would be remembered in history and become a god in the hearts of generations of actors. Li nodded. He agreed with Old Sun's words. Our goal is the Sea of Stars, the entire Jing Kingdom. Qing and Prefectural Theater isn't enough. I will stay here for the next few days and help you take care of things here. When this place is completely stabilized, some of us will continue to develop in the neighboring counties. The others will go to the capital. That will be our new starting point. The capital. Old Sun paused for a moment and nodded. He agreed with Li Yi's decision. Although Qing and Prefectural was prosperous, it couldn't compare to the capital. Furthermore, it was the capital of the Jing Kingdom. It had great significance. If they could take root in the capital and lead the trend, it would naturally be easier to infiltrate other places. Sir was indeed a Sir. His knowledge was far beyond what he could compare. Old Sun had already decided that he had to go to the capital personally. He had spent half his life wandering around. It made no difference to him whether it was Qing, in Prefectural, or the capital. Under these circumstances, he had to choose the place that needed him the most. Li Yi and Old Sun discussed the next step of the plan in more detail. Wan Ruoqing would sometimes express her opinion on the side. Suddenly, the three of them heard a strange sound at the same time. Li Yi turned his head and looked in the direction of the sound. Zheng Zumo's pretty face was red. She never drank the porridge she cooked herself. She didn't eat anything in the morning, and she had been walking around with them for more than 4 hours. She was already tired and hungry. Speaking of which, I'm hungry too. Let's go eat first. Li Yi broke the awkwardness with one sentence. Okay, Zheng Zumo said immediately. It's noon right now. The restaurant must be very busy. We can't find a place in a short time. It should be faster if we cook some simple dishes ourselves. Wan Ruoqing thought about it and suggested. Although Zheng Zumo was very hungry, she thought that what she said made sense. She had to endure a little longer. Why don't we go to my house? Wan Ruoqing and Old Sun were both great contributors to the theater. They were the most important veterans. Li Yi felt that it would be more sincere to invite them to his house for dinner. Moreover, it would be more convenient to discuss the future development of the theater at home. As for Zheng Zumo, it would be to repay her for the porridge in the morning. Let's go to the restaurant. Zheng Zumo heard this and immediately shook her head. Wan Ruoqing hesitated and also said, why don't we go to my place? It might be more convenient. It's not convenient. There's no one home anyway. I have to cook if I go back alone. Li waved his hand and said, it's decided. Strangely, the two women didn't raise any objections this time. As for Old Sun, eating was a small matter for him. It didn't matter where they ate. He also wanted to talk to Li Yi about the development plan of the theater. He bought 2 candied haws on the roadside for Zheng Zumo to eat first. On the way back, he also bought all the necessary ingredients. When the 4 people walked into the yard, Zheng Zumo looked around. She only saw the girl named Yang Liuqing cleaning the yard. There was no one in the house. For some reason, her heart quietly relaxed. Uncle, you're back. Yang Liuqing put down the broom, first bowed to Li Yi, and then slightly gestured to Wan Ruoqing and the others. Some children worked in the theater. She naturally knew Old Sun and Wan Ruoqing. She had also seen Zheng Zumo a few times, but she didn't talk much. Put these in the kitchen first. I'll go change clothes. Li Yi handed the things in his hand to her, then turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, you guys do as you please. You must be tired after walking all morning. Go inside and rest for a while. I'll come out soon. They were all old friends, so there was no need for formalities. Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo were already used to him being like this. It was Old Sun who looked a bit restrained. You guys go in and rest. I'll go help in the kitchen. Seeing Yang Liuqing enter the kitchen with the dishes, Wan Ruoqing also followed. I'll go too. Zheng Zumo thought about it and immediately followed. Old Sun, of course, would not join in the fun. He sat on a stone bench in the yard, looking at the distant sky, and fell into deep thought. His Excellency was right. He had to look further. The capital was a new and most suitable starting point. Their ultimate goal was not Qing, in prefecture or the capital, but the entire Jing kingdom. Even other countries could be considered. Chapter 409. Seeing that Li Yi had changed his clothes and walked out of the room, Old Sun immediately greeted him. In just a short while, he had formed a few preliminary ideas in his mind. Old Sun, you rest first. I will go and cook. If there is anything, we will talk about it later. Seeing Wan Ruoqing's figure appearing in the kitchen, Li Yi waved his hand and then walked to the kitchen. Here, he was the host, and Wan Ruoqing and the others were guests. There was no reason for the host to let the guests cook at home. Cook. Old Sun was stunned in place. How could a man do a woman's thing? In his heart, Li Yi was a godlike man. Imagine the scene of his god wearing an apron, humming a tune in the kitchen and chopping pig bones. He was old and couldn't bear such a psychological gap for a while. The dull expression on Old Sun's face did not recover for a long time. Not seeing Old Sun, who was stunned, Li walked into the kitchen and saw Yang Liuqing and Wan Ruoqing busy at the stove. Zheng Zumo squatted down and peeled a good green onion into pieces. Li Yi hurriedly grabbed it from her hand. From the bowl of porridge she cooked in the morning, it could be seen that this Miss Zumo was the same as his second Mississippi. They were both little fairies who did not do any chores. Fairies should be floating in the sky. Such vulgar words as peeling green onions to cook were not suitable for fairies. Okay, you go outside and rest. We'll be fine here. Li Yi waved his hand at her. It was enough to have Wan Ruoqing and Yang Liuqing to help. He didn't know how long it would take for him to cook a meal for 5 people. He had to find 2 people to help. There was no need to talk about Wan Ruoqing. Since the osmanthus cake was so delicious, how could her culinary skills be bad? As a wandering heroine, Yang Liuqing's ability to survive was definitely much better than ordinary people. It was not a problem for her to help out a little. At least, she would not peel a green onion until it was only as long as a little finger. Zheng Zumo was a little annoyed to see him chasing away flies. She crossed her arms and stood to the side. She wanted to see how a man like him did these kitchen things. He had reached the pinnacle of both the Tao of poetry and the Tao of painting. Being able to see a side that he was not good at made him feel quite satisfied. However, it didn't take long for her to disappear. As a woman, she couldn't help but feel ashamed. Even Wan Ruoqing was a little surprised. She knew that Li Yi often cooked, and his culinary skills should be passable. He could even make a bowl of ordinary porridge with endless aftertaste. However, when she saw his exquisite and somewhat exaggerated knife skills and skilled movements, she couldn't help but feel inferior. Yang Liuqing had stayed here for a long time, so she was not too surprised. If she was allowed to do it, she could cut it faster and better, although the taste was not comparable at all. Zheng Zumo didn't watch for long and walked out in shame. As a woman, it was not something to be proud of to be defeated by a man in a place where she should be proud. Steaming and boiling were still the mainstream diet of ordinary people, but it was not the case in Li Yi's family. Since they were not short of money, stir-frying with iron wok replaced those 2 simple cooking methods. Thus, Zheng Zumo smelled the aroma coming from the kitchen in the yard. She was already very hungry, and she almost involuntarily swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, she felt that this action seemed very spineless, so she involuntarily swallowed a mouthful of saliva again. In the past, in the jadeite courtyard, other than sometimes involuntarily singing and performing, she didn't have to worry about anything else. As the top artist of the jadeite courtyard, the madam would naturally have people serve her very well. However, after redeeming herself and moving out, she and Xiao Chui had to personally handle all the big and small things, including clothing, food, housing, and transportation. The trifling matters were still manageable, but the 3 meals a day couldn't be bought from a restaurant every time. However, she and Xiao Cui really didn't know anything about cooking, so they could only practice diligently, surrounding the stove for several hours a day. Fortunately, she was naturally intelligent, and after a few days, she finally understood that going to elder sister Ruoqing's place for a meal was the best solution. At this moment, smelling the fragrance in the air, she stared blankly at the direction of the kitchen, and her thoughts inevitably drifted away. If, a moment later, Zheng Zumo pinched her arm to expel that unrealistic thought from her mind. Wan Ruoqing and Yang Liuqing were in the kitchen. They helplessly found that other than picking the onions, peeling the garlic, and occasionally passing seasonings to him, they couldn't do anything else. No, they could still carry the plates. Every time Li Yi finished a dish, he would ask them to bring it out. After a short time, 4 hot dishes, 4 cold dishes, and 1 soup were all finished. A total of 8 dishes and 1 soup. It was already a very high standard to entertain guests. The square table was just enough for 4 people, but with the addition of Yang Liuqing, the 3 women were all skinny, so it didn't seem crowded even with 5 people. You guys have worked hard these days. I'll drink first to show my respect. Li Yi raised his cup to Wan Ruoqing and Oldman Sunday. Without them, there wouldn't be the current theater, and his plan wouldn't have been possible. This cup should be a toast. Of course, because most of the people sitting here were women, his cup was actually tea. However, a toast was the same. The details weren't important. Master, you're too kind, too kind. Oldman's son hurriedly raised his cup in return. His dreams and wishes could be realized all because of Li Yi's support. How hard was it to realize a dream? Zheng Zumo looked at the table full of delicious food and secretly swallowed a lot of saliva. She had been hungry for a long time, but she couldn't eat in front of so much food. It was a double mental and physical torture. This cup is for the future of the theater. This cup is for ourselves. Hearing these words, Zheng Zumo's face turned a little pale. Couldn't they toast after eating? They could toast while eating. Okay, the food will be cold in a while. Let's eat. Finally hearing these words from Li Yi's mouth, Zheng Zumo couldn't wait to pick up her chopsticks. Who? Hubby, is there a guest? Rui walked in from the door and looked at the situation in the room with a slightly startled expression. Mississippi Lu, who followed in, didn't have any expression, but the little maid on the side couldn't help but change her expression after seeing Zheng Zumo. Wasn't the painting that the son-in-law hid that woman? Zheng Zumo's already extended chopsticks stopped in midair. In an instant, she felt that her entire life had become a lot darker. Chapter 410. Zheng Zumo swore that except for the half-moldy steamed bun that she picked up in the kitchen after being hungry for 3 days in a musical house when she was a child, this was the most delicious meal she had ever eaten in her life. Sister Ruoqing's cooking was also very delicious, but it seemed that today's was more suitable for her taste. For this reason, she was a little, very envious of Li Yi's wife, even the little maid. When she was very young, even if there was only 1 unmoldy steamed bun to eat, she would feel very happy, thinking that it would be good if her whole life could be like today. Later, she was chosen by the madam of the Jade Courtyard, who took her to Qing Mansion. Since then, she never lived such a hard life again. As the top artist of the Jade Courtyard and the money tree of the madam, she naturally had no lack of luxurious clothes and good food, and was pursued by countless people. However, after that, no delicacy for her could compare with half a moldy steamed bun. So Li Yi was very curious why she could have tears in her eyes when eating a meal. Was it because the food he cooked was so delicious that she couldn't help being moved to tears? Li Yi felt that this was the greatest respect for the fruits of his labor, much more than Mississippi Lu's behavior of robbing him of food every time. So when Zheng Zumo was about to leave, Li Yi also invited her to visit his home when she was free. After living 2 lives, this was the most fulfilling cooking experience for him. Of course, this time, Mississippi Lu did not rob him, because she, Rui, and Xiaohuan did not sit at the same table with him and others. Yang Liuqing also went to their table. Li Yi happened to be discussing the theater with Old Sun and Wan Ruoqing during the meal. Your Excellency, after I go back, I will try to interview in several theaters according to what we just discussed. Old Sun's focus was not on whether the food was delicious or not, but on the matter of the brothel. This matter is not urgent. I will write a few news stories in these days, and when we attract enough guests, the effect will be better. Old Sun nodded repeatedly and asked tentatively, Then what about Master Wei? Li Yi smiled and said, Just do what you need to do. I'll take care of the rest. With Li Yi's words, Old Man Sun was finally reassured. This meant that an Anqi County magistrate wasn't worthy of the Lord's attention. With such a background, the development of the brothel would definitely be much smoother. After sending them off, He lay on the rocking chair in the courtyard alone. While closing his eyes to rest, he was also thinking about something. The brothels in Qing and Fu were actually just an unintentional decision he had made a few months ago. At the time, he did have the idea of creating something like the entertainment industry in ancient times, but it was only to satisfy some of his interests. However, he gradually realized that the purpose of the brothel seemed to be more than just entertainment. It could also be used for many other things. It was like an invisible blunt knife. It looked rusty, but hid a dazzling sharpness. The trip to the capital made him more aware that he needed to do something or prepare something. Although the token in his arms was useful, it was not his. Others could take it back with a word or a thought. How could he have peace of mind when he had something that truly belonged to him? Wulin Hero Ranking, Wulin Jianghu. Li Yi's index finger lightly tapped on the armrest of the rocking chair. At this moment, no one, including himself, knew that the words he was muttering in the courtyard would stir up the entire Jianghu of the Jing Kingdom in the near future, to the extent that the world would be turned upside down. At this moment, Xiao Huan was helping Rui clean up the dishes in the kitchen. From time to time, she would poke her head out to take a look. Only when she saw the son-in-law alone in the courtyard did she feel relieved. Slightly further away from Li Yi, the sword in Yang Liuqing's hand danced. Mississippi Lu stood to the side and watched. Occasionally, she would open her mouth to give him a few pointers. Every time this happened, a look of joy would appear on Yang Liuqing's face. In just a moment, the sword's light would become even sharper. Two branches of red apricot peeked over the wall and into the courtyard. The leaves rustled in the breeze. The warm breeze was pleasant and refreshing. Li Yi turned over and immediately felt much more comfortable. He then remembered that it had been a long time since he had felt so comfortable. Not long after he closed his eyes, the familiar drowsiness of noon hit him. His perception of his surroundings gradually disappeared. At this time, it was the second year of Jinghe, 10th of April, spring. In Qing, in prefecture, for most people, they might not know who the magistrate was or who the prefectural magistrate was. They might not even know who the emperor was. This was because it was too distant for them. However, it was impossible for them not to know who the Luo Shui goddess was. Those poems were really too famous. Especially when the Luo Shanfu was released, it caused countless people to fight to copy it. This indirectly caused the price of paper in Qing, in prefecture, to increase by more than 20%. Many paper shops and printing shops became rich because of this. Naturally, they were grateful to the goddess of Luo Shui and the #1 scholar of Qing, in prefecture, who was famous but never seen. The gifted scholars marveled at the attainments of the poems themselves and regarded the chance encounter with the beauties described in the poems as a matter of elegance. After this incident, the reputation of the Jade Courtyard's leading courtesan became even greater. Even those who had not been educated wanted to see what the woman, who was rumored to be like a fairy from heaven, looked like. They could not see the fairies in heaven, but could they not see the Luo Shui goddess who had come down to earth? The fame of the Luo Shui goddess was not only limited to men. In Qing and prefecture, whether it was a young lady from a noble family or a village woman who did not want to see her, they were all women. Those who had the slightest bit of confidence in their looks all wanted to compare with the Luo Shui goddess. Were they lacking? Of course, there were also smart people like the 10 top courtesans who understood that they were lacking compared to Zhengzhumo. One was the #1 scholar in Qing and prefecture, and the other was the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. In short, the former top courtesan of the Jadeite courtyard, the Luo Shui goddess Zhengzhumo, had been the topic of conversation in Qing and prefecture and the focus of everyone's attention. 2 months ago, everyone thought that she had an extremely ambiguous relationship with the #1 scholar in Qing and prefecture. Otherwise, why would he write such a poem for her? However, after 2 months of observation, everyone was surprised to find that no one of the opposite sex had ever appeared by Zheng Zimo's side. For most people, this was, without a doubt, great news. In particular, those self-proclaimed romantic geniuses or noble young masters who had a bit of confidence in their looks suddenly became the lascivious bees and butterflies around the Luo Shui goddess. They tried to win over the Luo Shui goddess who had fallen to earth. Even the son of the county magistrate was no exception. However, after so many days had passed, it seemed that no one had won the Luo Shui goddess's heart. The Luo Shui goddess hadn't even attended a single banquet. This news was neither good nor bad. They didn't get to pick the peach, at least others didn't get to taste it either. Everyone's hearts were balanced. However, at this time, an unknown fellow who blocked their way out of nowhere had snatched away the peach that they had been yearning for. How could they not be angry? For a moment, the guy whose name was unknown immediately became the public enemy of all men in Qing and prefecture after the news spread. Chapter 411. Is there any news? Who on earth is he? I heard from the people I saw that day that the man looks unfamiliar. He doesn't seem to be very famous in the Qing and prefecture. Could it be that he isn't from the Qing and prefecture? This is outrageous. The Luo Shui goddess belongs to the Qing and prefecture. How can she be taken away by an outsider? In just 2 days, topics such as who on earth is the mysterious man beside the Luo Shui goddess, and what is the relationship between the outsider and the Luo Shui goddess immediately became the hot topic of discussion. The speed at which it spread was enough to make people dumbfounded. In fact, the focus of people's discussion was no longer on Zheng Zimo. The man who appeared beside her that day was the focus of the public's opinion. Investigate. We must find out who he is. In a gorgeous mansion, a young nobleman ordered several servants. It's impossible for him to suddenly appear beside Lady Zimo. There must be something we don't know. Go and investigate. Apart from me, who else is worthy of the Luo Shui goddess? No matter who that person is, I will make him regret it. Messages and orders came from all corners, and countless pairs of eyes stared at Zheng Zimo's residence. However, other than occasionally seeing her go out to the theater or go to another woman's residence, they didn't find anything suspicious. The man seemed to appear out of thin air and then disappeared into thin air, completely disappearing from everyone's sight. He didn't disappear. In order to write the Jing Kingdom's version of Journey to the West and the legend of the Condor heroes as soon as possible, he almost didn't go out for the past few days. He edited, combined with the real history of this world, and removed the parts that were easy to be harmonized. There was a lot of work to be done. Even his daily sunbathing time was compressed to half an hour. Maybe it was because he hadn't tried to work so hard for a long time. After a few days, he felt that his body couldn't bear it. Thinking that Wan Ruoqing had persisted for more than 2 months in a more difficult and tiring situation than him, a man who could be regarded as a low-level martial artist in the martial arts world couldn't compare with a weak woman, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. At this moment, he planned to go to Huichun Hall to buy some ingredients for making medicinal cuisine. The recipe for the medicinal cuisine was found by him after looking through many books. He would give it to Xiaozhu later and ask her to nourish Wan Ruoqing's body during this period. After all, the future development of the theater couldn't do without her. The reason why he chose to go to Huichun Hall was because it was the nearest medicine shop. Secondly, he didn't have to pay there. When he taught the suturing technique to Dr. Chun from Huichun Hall, Dr. Chun said that in order to thank him for his selfless contribution, the medicine hall would not charge him a single cent as long as he came to visit them in the future. Only by being careful could he live a long life. Although he didn't have much money, as a man who knew how to live, he should save where he could, right? The door of the medicine shop was open. Li took out the recipe for the medicinal cuisine from his arms and walked in. "Doctor, how is my eldest brother's injury?" In Huichun Hall, a strong man grabbed Dr. Chen's arm and said, Don't worry. Let me go first." Dr. Chen struggled to get rid of the man's hand. He stood up and said, "His external injuries are not serious. He will recover after a few days of rest. But the internal injury he suffered is quite serious. I'm afraid it will take him a long time to recuperate." "A long time to recuperate? That is to say, my eldest brother won't die?" The strong man pondered over Dr. Chen's words. After a moment, his face lit up and he grabbed Dr. Chen's hand again and asked. Dr. Chen shook off his hand again. With one hand behind his back, he raised his head and looked like a lonely master. He said, "Who am I? It's just a small injury. Of course, it won't be fatal." "That's great, that's great." The strong man cried out in surprise. Then he thought of something and said angrily, "Those quacks said that even immortals couldn't save my eldest brother. They're all useless. Dr. Chen's medical skills are better." As a doctor, Dr. Chen was very happy to be praised by a patient. A smile also appeared on his old face. Glancing at the middle-aged man who was lying on the bed, his complexion much better than before, he secretly felt that it was not time for him to die. If he had come a few months earlier, he was afraid that he would have ended up the same as the quack that the man had mentioned. He could only come to the conclusion that even a deity would not be able to save him. What kind of divine person could come up with a method to stitch up people's wounds like a bag? It seemed incredible, but could save people in times of crisis. He went to the capital once and personally handed this method to the imperial physician. When he left the capital, the imperial physician had already decided to promote this method to the world. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, how many lives would be saved and how much good karma would be created? Even if 1 in 10,000 of them were to fall on him, it would be enough to protect him from illness and disaster for several lifetimes. "Thank you, divine doctor. Thank you." Just when Dr. Chen was distracted, the man had already knelt on the ground and kowtowed to him. It was a doctor's duty to treat and save people. Dr. Chen hurriedly bent down to help him up. However, the man was so strong that he could not move him at all even when he used all his strength. Seeing a figure enter Huichun Hall, Dr. Chen was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Don't thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank that lord." The suturing technique used to save your elder brother's life was suggested by that lord. Although the man's brain was not good enough most of the time, it was not to the extent that he could not understand the sentence. He turned around and was about to speak when he saw the young man standing in front of him. He was stunned for a moment and blurted out the word benefactor. Li was also stunned. As soon as he walked into the medicine shop, someone bowed to him. What was even more unexpected was that the guy kneeling on the ground was the stupid and cute mountain bandit who wanted to rob him a few days ago, but was mercilessly humiliated by Mississippi Lou. He looked at Dr. Chen with a puzzled expression. His meaning was obvious. What was the situation in front of him? The process of the matter was not complicated. After Dr. Chen explained a few words, Li finally figured out the situation. It turned out that a few days ago, after the man was rejected by several doctors in the city, he carried his injured brother and came to him. If it was a few months ago, he did not know how to suture wounds. In order to avoid trouble, he might have told the man to go back and prepare for his funeral. However, things had changed. Dr. Chen was now a first-class divine doctor in the eyes of everyone. He disinfected, sterilized, and sutured the wound. After this set of procedures, he finally brought the man back from the gates of hell. Hence, the scene of the man kowtowing today. However, Dr. Chen knew better than anyone else that although he was the one who saved the man, the person this man should thank the most should be Li Yi. "Benefactor, we owe you our lives." After knowing the truth, the man patted his chest and said with a serious expression, "If you have any errands in the future, just let me know. I won't frown even if I have to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames." Li Yi thought to himself, "How is this owing a life? If it weren't for your stupidity, you would have died under Mississippi Lou's sword a few days ago when you blocked the road to rob him. How would you have the chance to kneel here and kowtow?" Chapter 412. You don't have to, Li Yi waved his hand. Why would he need someone to climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of flames for him? Even if he did, he wouldn't dare to ask this silly, cute man to do it. His ability to do bad things was definitely much stronger than his ability to do good things. The person lying on the bed was a rather thin, middle-aged man. His face was thin, and he looked somewhat similar to the burly man. Perhaps it was because he was injured, but his face was slightly pale. After the burly man spoke, he also spoke, "My younger brother is slow-witted. If he has offended you in any way, I apologize on his behalf." The middle-aged man spoke politely and properly. He didn't seem to have the same parents as the stupid man at all. He shook his head and said, "It's not that I've offended you. It's just that I need to be more familiar with the official language in the future so that I can disguise myself as a bandit. I've already memorized it. If you don't believe me, I'll recite it for you." When the big man heard this, he said with some dissatisfaction, "Listen, benefactor, I planted this mountain, and I opened this tree." He was starting to wonder if the two of them were really twins, but the distribution of the brain during the embryonic stage was not very balanced. This man had obviously only received a small portion of the brain, but his body had been compensated. He was much more muscular than his elder brother. It was a surprise to see the two brothers here. He still had serious things to do. He explained the purpose of his visit to Dr. Chun. Dr. Chun immediately ran to the counter to get the medicine and asked if he could keep a copy of the prescription for the medicinal diet for later study. It was just an ordinary medicinal diet prescription. In the future, there were all kinds of dietary supplements that could be found everywhere. He had just picked one out of them. Perhaps any old Chinese medicine doctor's prescription was not worse than this one. If he wanted to study it, let him be. Watching Li take the medicine and leave Huichun Hall, the big man's expression was a little regretful. He was not a person who didn't know how to repay kindness. On the contrary, if he received kindness from others for no reason, he would always feel depressed if he didn't return it quickly. However, they didn't need him at all, which made him very depressed. After a while, the big man seemed to think of something. He took out an ingot of silver from his arms and put it on the counter. He said to Dr. Chun, "This is the medicine fee for the next few days. If it's not enough, I'll think of another way." Dr. Chun smiled and pushed the silver back and said, "Since you're a friend of young Lord Li, if I accept the silver, I'm afraid I'll be punished. In the future, you can take the medicine and boil it here. Don't mention the medicine fee again." Huichun Hall had been open for dozens of years, so it must have accumulated a lot of money. Dr. Chun was not short of these few taels of silver. For him, because he had personally offered his miraculous skill, he had received a promise from the imperial physician, which was far more important than a few hundred or a few thousand taels of silver. Soon, he would hand over Huichun Hall to his disciple. He would go to the capital again and learn medical skills from Lord Liu. If he could achieve great medical skills in his lifetime and enter the imperial physician's bureau to work, he would have no regrets even if he died. The middle-aged man slowly sat up from the bed. He had always been decisive, so he didn't refuse. Even if he wanted to repay the kindness, the prerequisite was that his body could recover. He smiled and said, "I am greatly indebted to you, but I don't know your identity. I'm really ashamed. I wonder if Dr. Chun can tell me?" The middle-aged man was obviously very talkative. When the two of them talked, the big man felt a little bored. He scratched his ears and cheeks, feeling very uncomfortable. There were experts competing in the theater outside the city today. Both of them were rare experts on the heavenly list. He didn't know if the hero's ranking and heavenly list would change after today. If he could go and watch the show, how good it would be. Under Li Yi's arrangements, Wan Ruoqing didn't have much to do these few days. Other than occasionally going to the brothel, she stayed at home to read the two books, Journey to the West and The Legend of the Condor Heroes. She wasn't very interested in the latter, but she heard from Old Sun that the book was very well received in the theaters outside the city. When the storytellers told the stories, the theaters were almost full, and most of them were people from the martial arts world. Old Sun had always been in charge of matters related to the martial arts world. She spent most of her time on the former. Obviously, this story had a wider audience and was suitable for almost all theaters. When they received a story, They would first spread it around through the storyteller. As time passed and the popularity of the story died down, they would then adapt it into a play. Any guest who had heard the story would almost never miss out on these plays, and the theater would thus welcome a second wave of customers. However, this wasn't all. For example, all the stories in Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio had been printed into books through the printing workshop. They were very popular in Qing, in Prefecture, and were always in short supply. There were also picture books adapted from the stories, and even snacks sold in the theater. These were all extensions of the theater's business. In her free time, she would occasionally think about how the brothel, which had only had a dozen people and was struggling to survive, almost falling apart, had grown into such a colossus in such a short period of time. Originally, she just wanted to live with Yuju in Qing and Prefecture. Even if they weren't rich, they could still get by. She never thought that a day would come where she could decide the fate of countless actors with a single thought. She didn't lack in material things, but she needed to be more careful with every step she took. As she was thinking about these things, Xiao Zhu came bouncing in from outside. She waved the thing in her hand and said, "Sister Ruoqing, guess what this is?" Wan Ruoqing didn't answer because she knew that with Xiao Zhu's personality, she would definitely say it in the next moment. "This is the medicine that Li Li just sent over. He said it's for some kind of medicinal cuisine." Xiao Zhu put the thing in her hand on the table and said, "This time, he told me to take good care of you. You're not allowed to sleep late, and you're not allowed to care about the things in the theater. You just have to take care of your body." The young girl said with a smile, "Don't worry, I'll definitely raise you until you're fair and fat. Otherwise, how can I be worthy of the salary he paid me?" With that, she picked up the things on the table again and ran to the kitchen. "Let me do some research first. What exactly is this medicinal cuisine?" Wan Ruoqing stood up and walked into the courtyard. She stretched her body. Outside the courtyard walls, there were flowing clouds floating in the sky. Separated by a wall, the sound of two people coughing could be heard. "Miss, it's burnt again." The young girl coughed as she said, "Miss, forget it. You can't make this. Let's go out and buy it. Or we can go to Miss Ruoqing's place to eat." Drunk Emo seemed to have been stimulated a few days ago and became even more passionate about the kitchen. However, although her painting skills were superb and her singing skills were also extraordinary, she didn't seem to have much talent in cooking. After a few days, not only did she not improve at all, but her ability to make that little courtyard a mess was increasing day by day. "Today's dishes, as usual, I have to make more." Thinking this in her heart, she walked towards the kitchen. "These are all groundless rumors. Can you believe them?" Li rolled his eyes at Mississippi Lu and pushed the little servant girl's pitiful head to the side. "But the people outside are saying in..." Xiao Huan's face was bitter. The people outside were saying that the goddess of Luo Shui already had someone she liked, and the person she liked was the #1 scholar in Qing and Prefecture. Wasn't that the son-in-law? There was another half of the sentence that she didn't say. The person in the painting that the son-in-law still hid in the room was that person. "Rumors, they're all rumors." Li shook his head and said, "In the past, I owed someone a favor. I wanted to write a few poems to repay it, but I didn't expect that it would be misinterpreted by others and become like this. Rumors are fiercer than tigers. In the future, don't believe them so easily." "What favor?" Mississippi Lu was always able to grasp the main point in time. He couldn't tell Mississippi Lu in front of her that if she hadn't disguised herself as a man to check the jade yard, he wouldn't have owed her this favor. Li waved his hand and said, "What favor is not important? Think about it. Who is the goddess of Luo Shui? She is the most beautiful woman in Qing and Prefecture. She is the goddess in the hearts of all men. The number of men chasing after her can line up from Rui Square to outside the prefectural city. How could it be possible?" If he continued, it would seem like he was belittling himself. Li looked at them and said, "Furthermore, these few months, we haven't been in Qing and Prefecture. You don't believe your own eyes and actually believe those street rumors?" "I knew the son-in-law wouldn't." The little servant girls eyes immediately turned into crescent moons and dimples appeared at the corner of her mouth. Mississippi Lou thought for a moment and felt that what Li Yi said was very reasonable. She then looked at him and asked, "The most beautiful woman in Qing in prefecture?" He shouldn't have said all this to them just now, especially to Mississippi Lou. He didn't even know what she was focused on. He had to go and talk to Rui. It was time to discipline this sister of hers. Rui's skills. Rui was tidying up her clothes in the room. She looked at Li Yi, who was leaning against the door, and thought for a moment. She said, "Although Rui is young, she is very talented in martial arts. With her current strength, as long as she doesn't encounter a grandmaster, she can basically be in a position of invincibility. However, because of her age and experience, she actually doesn't have much experience in fighting. If she meets an experienced master at the same level, she may be at a disadvantage." "Are there many grandmaster masters in the martial arts world?" Li Yi thought for a moment and asked. Rui smiled and shook her head. She said, "The threshold to become a grandmaster is very high. In the martial arts world, including those martial arts seniors who are not well known, the number of grandmasters can be counted with 2 hands. Moreover, when martial arts reach that level, they have already returned to their original state and their state of mind will also improve. They rarely fight with others, so the possibility of meeting them is too small." With this, Li Yi was relieved. In other words, below the grandmaster level, with Mississippi Lou's strength, she could be proud in the martial arts world. And those who could beat her were definitely rare in this world. The probability of meeting them was not much higher than winning the lottery. Then let her be. Mississippi Lou always had excess energy. It was better to find a place for her to vent than to let her find trouble with him. The Wuling hero list produced by the theater now had a lot of credibility and authority in the martial arts world and was recognized by many people in the martial arts world. Of course, after a few months, the current rankings had already undergone earth-shattering changes. Naturally, there was no change in the Grandmaster list. Those mysterious martial arts legends had long been recognized by the public. No one would be confident enough to challenge the names on the list. However, the Heaven ranking was just below the Grandmaster ranking and was also the most important and eye-catching ranking of the Wuling Hero ranking. It changed almost every few days, and new names would appear on it from time to time. The original rankings on it were also constantly changing. The martial arts competition in the martial arts world was popular because of this list. Everyone was proud of having a ranking on the hero list. Every day, there were people in the theater who would classify and organize the information collected to ensure the timeliness and fairness of the list. There were even storytellers who turned the ranking battles into wonderful stories. Those in the martial arts world who did not have the chance to see the battle with their own eyes were also satisfied. It also made Oldman's son and the others count money until their hands were cramping. However, no matter how the ranking on the list changed, the first place of the Heaven list still belonged to a woman. Although that position originally represented strength and status, when other people increased their ranking through battle after battle, they never saw the first place of the Heaven list. Even when someone announced that they wanted to challenge the first place never responded. As time went on, naturally, there would be many discordant voices, especially those who were ranked at the top. They probably had some complaints. Some people even secretly talked about the shady business of the list, saying that the first place of the Heaven list did not live up to its name and should be replaced as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be unfair. Mississippi Lou heard two people in the martial arts world talking about this when she was shopping one day. At the same time, it was also the first time she heard that the theater outside the city actually provided a place for martial arts people to compete and learn from each other. The ranking was determined by victory and defeat. She had long been dissatisfied with the fact that her name was not on the list. The next day, she single-handedly defeated the 9th place of the Heaven list, a master who happened to be in Qing and Prefecture. She entered the top 10 of the Heaven list in her first battle. Ever since the World of Martial Arts Hero Ranking Board was released, there would be an unknown dark horse who would appear once every few days. They would defeat powerful players who had been famous for a long time and charge into everyone's sights. But this was the first time someone had defeated someone in the top 10 of the Heaven ranking board. Considering that the ninth place did not even last for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn before he surrendered, the person in charge of adjusting the ranking temporarily put her in the 5th place. It was also at this time that the people knew her name, Lu Rui. They were both extremely skilled in martial arts, had a similar name, and were both in Qing and Prefecture. They would not believe that she did not have a relationship with the 1st place of the Heaven list, Lu Rui. This news was quickly verified. This time, no one said that the 1st place of the Heaven list was undeserved. The younger sister was so powerful. How bad could the older sister be? If anyone still had doubts, they would first defeat the 5th place of the Heaven list. The reason why she was ranked 5th was because the 3 people in front of her were not in Qing and Prefecture. Perhaps even those 3 did not have absolute confidence in defeating her. There was no need for the theater to deliberately promote her. This heroine Lu, who came out of nowhere and had both beauty and strength, became the hot topic of discussion in Jianghu in a few short days. Chapter 413. Topics related to the Luo Shui goddess had gradually died down in Qing and Prefecture. When they learned that the man she held that day was the well-deserved number 1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture, and even the number 1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom, everyone's attitudes were completely different from before. After all, before Xingzumo was the Luo Shui goddess. When she was only a leading artist in the Jade's courtyard, she seemed to have an unclear relationship with that person. The reason she had the title of Luo Shui goddess was because of that person's Luo Shui goddess Fu. The goddess belonged to someone else. Even if they were envious and jealous, they could only be envious and jealous. In terms of literary talent, the scholars of Qing and had already been beaten black and blue by that person. Even when it came to poetry, they felt tired. There was a mountain in front of them. No, there were countless mountains blocking their way. Any one of them was a height they could never climb in their entire lives. Under such circumstances, who would have the heart to climb a mountain? This directly caused countless scholars of Qing and to no longer have any interest in poetry. Most of their energy was placed on history and essays. It made Professor Foam smile in his sleep. Poetry was a small path. As scholars, they should focus on the imperial examinations. They could not lose sight of the bigger picture because of small gains. Who would have thought that something he had advised countless times to no avail would be solved by that kid with a few poems? According to a few professors of the prefectural school, Professor Foam was overjoyed and immediately composed a poem. When he raised his eyes and saw the bright moon collection that a student had placed on the table, his face immediately darkened and he burned his poem. Because Li Yi's most famous poem was Shu Diao Gu, almost everyone in Qing, in Prefecture, could recite, "When will the moon be clear?" Holding a cup of wine, I asked the blue sky. Some busybodies took the first 2 words and named his poem Collection of Bright Moon. Li Yi never participated in poetry competitions and did not interact with the scholars. Naturally, he could not deny this. Over time, everyone tacitly agreed. Other than his literary talent, he was also the former Anxi County lieutenant. Now, he seemed to have been transferred to the capital. Although his official position was not known, he had been favored by the emperor when he was still in Qing and Prefecture. Now, it was likely that he would go one step further. Although no one knew why he had returned to Qing and Prefecture, he was still someone most people had to look up to. No matter how they compared themselves to him, it was a sad thing. Everyone felt depressed in their hearts, but they had to admit that they were impressed. Of course, not everyone thought that way. What number 1 scholar in Qing and Prefecture? Can scholars be eaten? In the Yichuan brothel, a young nobleman lay on a soft mattress in one of the rooms. In his arms was a beautiful woman that the brothel had recently promoted. The young man's hand groped the woman's perky curves as he said, "Even if he was the commandant of Anxi County, that was only in the past. So what if he went to the capital? He still came back with his tail between his legs. What does Miss Zumo see in him? Yes, 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 young master is right. A skinny young man who was dressed like a servant nodded and said, Anchi County is young master's territory. Even if you're a dragon or a tiger, you'll have to bow down to him. That goddess must be blind to actually— Shut up. The nobleman glared at him and said, Miss Zumo just didn't realize how good I am. I don't blame her, but I'd like to see just what kind of person that Li E is to be able to make Miss Zumo see him in a different light. Tonight at the Drunken Fragrance Brothel, invite that Li guy over. Yes, young master. I'll arrange it right away. The young man responded and glanced greedily at the woman in the nobleman's arms before quickly retreating. A moment later, alluring panting could be heard from the room. Just as the young man jogged out of the Ichuan brothel, the nobleman also walked out of the room with a satisfied expression. Let's go back to the yamen. The nobleman waved his hand and walked out of the brothel, escorted by several figures. Advisor Chun, please forgive me for not being able to agree to your request, Old Man Sun said to a man with a small mustache in the Chongping Street Theater. This man was the advisor and #1 lackey of the current Anshi County Magistrate, Wei Dapeng. Under the magistrate's orders, he had been causing trouble for the theater these days. Advisor Chen squinted at him and said, I say, Old Man Sun, you better think this through. You've colluded with martial arts bandits and greatly disrupted the peace and order of this county. If it weren't for my lord's benevolence, do you think your theater would still be able to operate? Advisor Chin's words are a little unreasonable. Everyone knows that Anshi County is full of chivalrous people who specialize in pacifying injustice and assisting the county magistrate's constables in solving cases. This has made Anshi County the most stable among all the counties in Qing. How can there be bandits here? Old Man Sun said calmly, neither servile nor overbearing. If it had been a few days ago, he naturally wouldn't have dared to speak to Advisor Chen like this, because Advisor Chen was, after all, County Magistrate Wei's advisor. However, things were different now. Their backer had returned, so he naturally spoke with more confidence. Moreover, what he said was the truth. Ever since the release of the Wulin Hero ranking, the atmosphere in the martial arts world near Qing and Prefecture had changed greatly, not to mention the entire Jianghu. Didn't people live for fame and fortune? Most of the people in the martial arts world acted freely. They didn't care much about money, but they cared a lot about fame. Who didn't want their stories of chivalry to be made into stories by storytellers and spread throughout Qing and Prefecture, so that the name of chivalry would spread throughout the Jianghu? As a result, the number of chivalrous people near Qing and Prefecture had suddenly increased recently. Some ruffian who teased innocent women on the streets might be beaten up so badly that even his mother wouldn't be able to recognize him if he said one more dirty word. Not long after, the story of Master Wang standing up for innocent women and beating up ruffians would appear on the bulletin board of a certain theater. There were many chivalrous people who had nothing better to do. In comparison, the ruffians in the county who bullied the market were not enough. It was not uncommon for them to be tied up like rice dumplings and hung on the wall, loudly repentant. For a time, all the villains in Anshi County felt insecure, while the commoners were the exact opposite. Their sense of happiness and security was increasing. The Wulin Hero ranking did not only rank martial arts. There was also a corresponding chivalrous ranking, which ranked people based on their moral character, reputation, and the number of chivalrous deeds they had done. If a chivalrous person received a banner of gratitude from others, or if someone found a diary that recorded their chivalrous deeds, they would gain points. This directly made Anshi County the most civilized county of the year in Qing and Prefecture. Old Man Sun did not understand. In the end, the honor would still fall on County Magistrate Wei's head. Why did he still make things so difficult for them? Chivalrous people? Chivalrous people? Advisor Chun pursed his lips and said, They're just a motley crew. The security of Anshi County is, of course, due to my lord's efforts. What does it have to do with those bandits? Hearing Advisor Chen's words, even the two bailiffs behind him couldn't help but twitch the corners of their mouths. The security of Anshi County was, of course, due to the former county lieutenant. After the county lieutenant left, it was the theater that drove those chivalrous people from the martial arts world that contributed the most. It had nothing to do with County Magistrate Wei. He was just lucky to have taken over Anshi County at this time. If he was really as brilliant as Advisor Chen said, why would he have been transferred from the capital to Qing Prefecture? Chapter 414. Old Sun looked at Advisor Chen and said faintly, "I'm sorry, Advisor Chen. If you have anything to say, you should speak to our boss." The theater still had a long way to go. He would never let his blood, sweat, and tears be destroyed in the hands of others. Of course, not only would he not agree, but young Surly would not agree either. "Who is your boss?" Advisor Chen asked with a frown. Old Sun pointed in the direction of the door. "That's him." Advisor Chen turned his head and looked at the young man walking in. He was slightly startled. He didn't think that the boss of the theater, which was almost everywhere in Qing and Prefecture, would be so young. In his shock, he didn't notice that the two bailiffs standing beside him became excited when they saw the young man. "I don't care who is in charge here. My boss has condescended to host a banquet at Drunken Fragrance Tower tonight. He has invited some merchants like you. Remember, this is your last chance." Advisor Chen said coldly. He then turned to the two bailiffs and said, "Let's go." It wasn't until a long time after he left the theater that he felt something was missing. He looked around and found that the two bailiffs who were supposed to be following him were gone. "Sir, you're back." The two bailiffs immediately walked to Li Yi's side and said excitedly the moment Advisor Chen walked out of the door. Li Yi looked at the two and smiled. "Dainyu, Wei Chong, I haven't seen you in a few months. You two seem to have regressed." Dainyu laughed awkwardly. Ever since Sir Lu left, County Magistrate Wei only used his own confidence in the county government. The days of old bailiffs like them were not good. During this time, bailiffs Dainyu and the others have helped us a lot. Otherwise, our days would have been even more difficult before Sir returned, Old Sun said with a smile. "It's only right, it's only right." Dainyu rubbed his head and smiled. "I was thinking of quitting this lousy bailiff position and finding a job here. It's better than being bullied in the county government." All right. If you don't want to be a constable, do you think your wife will forgive you?" He waved his hand, sat down on the chair next to him, and said, just in time, "Tell me, what's going on with that Lord Wei? What's the situation in the county government now?" No one knew these things better than Dainyu and the others. Dainyu stepped forward and immediately said, "This is Sir Wei. He came here after Sir Lu was transferred to the capital to be a high-ranking official. I heard that he used to be an official in the capital, but I don't know what kind of official he was. Usually his eyes are on his head. Even Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng didn't look him in the eye." Magistrate Wang was very sad. He was so sad that he couldn't even taste his favorite tea. He was healthy, his children were filial, and his married life was harmonious. The only thing that could trouble him was his career. 2 months ago, on a sunny day like today, he and Magistrate Lu had rare leisure time. They drank tea and chatted in a secluded place in the back of the government office. Anshi County had become a model for all the counties in Qing and Prefecture and even the whole country. Even the imperial court had praised it. As parents and magistrates, they naturally gained a lot of credit. The two of them, who originally didn't have much hope for an official career, couldn't help but feel a little ambitious as they chatted. He still remembered County Magistrate Lu's high-spirited appearance that day. At that time, he had even flattered him. It was probably because County Magistrate Lu's forehead was full of vigor and his glabella was shining. In the future, his career as an official would definitely prosper, and he would not waste his life in the position of Anshi County Magistrate. Before the two of them finished their cup of tea, a Yamen runner came to report that the imperial court had sent an urgent document. What happened after that could be described as a twist and turn of events. Magistrate Lu was really promoted. The Anshi County Magistrate inexplicably became the capital magistrate. It seemed that they were both county magistrates, but there was a huge difference between them. Although Anshi County was also a superior county, The Anshi County Magistrate couldn't be compared with the capital magistrate in terms of rank, status, and future. One could only drink tea and chat in a place 800 miles away from the capital, while the other entered the real center of power in this country. Many people said that one couldn't be a capital magistrate for 3 lifetimes, which meant that one could only be a capital magistrate if he didn't practice morality for 3 lifetimes in a row. It was like saying that the grapes were sour. Whoever believed it would be an asshole. Although County Magistrate Wong was envious of County Magistrate Liu, he was still a little happy in his heart. After all, in Anshi County, as the second in command, he was only half a rank lower than Magistrate Liu. Of course, those big shots in the magistrate's office were not included. Generally speaking, when Magistrate Liu left, he could also move up a bit. Although it was only half a rank, he was still a top official, wasn't he? However, Magistrate Wong didn't receive an imperial edict from His Majesty, but County Magistrate Wei came. County Magistrate Liu became County Magistrate Wei, but Magistrate Wong was still the same Magistrate Wong. What made him even more depressed was that County Magistrate Wei was transferred from the capital and seemed to be very familiar with a big shot in the magistrate's office. He had only been here for 2 months, but he already had the absolute initiative in the county government. He and Secretary Zheng were completely powerless, and Magistrate Wong was even more leisurely than before. Dog official. Magistrate Wong spat. After taking a sip of tea, he heard a voice coming from behind. "Sir, the tea is cold. Do you need another cup?" "Pooh." Magistrate Wong spat out all the famous tea that he usually didn't bear to take out. He turned around in panic. When he saw the person standing behind him, he scolded angrily. "Bastard, when did you come here?" "Just when Sir scolded me as a dog official." Dinyo scratched his head and said with grievance. Then he showed an interested expression and said, "Sir, who were you scolding just now?" "I was scolding myself." Magistrate Wong's little heart was still pounding. He kicked Dinyo's but hard and said, "Get out, get out, get as far away from me as possible. Don't let me see you again. Just scold County Magistrate Wei. Everyone in the county government knows that you always scold County Magistrate Wei behind his back." Dinyo muttered and said as he walked back, "I came to tell Sir that Sir Li is back. He also asked about the county government today. I said that Sir and Secretary Zhang's situation is not very good. Sir Li said that since we are colleagues, he should help them if they have any difficulties while he is still in Qing, in prefecture. Since he didn't, I'll go and tell Sir Li now." "Get out if you don't get out." Seeing Dinyo muttering, Magistrate Wong just scolded him. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and asked, "What did you say?" "Sir Li is back." "Which Sir Li?" "But Sir is no longer a county lieutenant now. Even if the two of us join hands, we can't defeat County Magistrate Wei." "Forget it." Dinyo muttered to himself and then shook his head. He was about to leave Magistrate Wong's sight. County Lieutenant? Could it be County Lieutenant Li? Hearing this, Magistrate Wong's eyes lit up. Looking at Dinyo's disappearing back, he rushed up like an arrow. Come, Dinyo, taste this tea." Magistrate Wong poured a cup of tea for Dinyo and patted his shoulder. He said with a smile, "You have been a constable in the county government for a long time. I remember that you were already here when I was just transferred to Anshi County. Dinyo, tell me honestly, how do I usually treat you?" Seeing Magistrate Wong uncharacteristically stroking his shoulder with one hand, Dinyo took a few steps back and suddenly thought of a rumor that all the runners in the county government knew. It was said that Magistrate Wong and County Magistrate Liu often did some shameful things in a room in the back office. It was not a big news that Magistrate Wong had a fetish for men. Thinking of this, he immediately covered his chest with his hands and said in horror, Sir, don't do this. I won't obey you even if I die." Chapter 415. Did Lord Li really say that? Magistrate Wong pretended to be calm as he looked at Dinyo, but he was actually very nervous. Others might not know about his former colleague's magical powers, but how could he not know? He might not be able to fight against the new prefectural magistrate, But County Magistrate Wei. Who was County Magistrate Wei? Dinyo scratched his head and said, "Not necessarily. Perhaps I misunderstood. Lord Li actually didn't mean that." Magistrate Wang's eyelids twitched. If he didn't have something to ask him, he would have kicked him. He forcefully suppressed his urge to kick him and said, "What did Lord Li say? Tell me everything without missing a word." What Dinyo said next would determine whether he could turn over a new leaf in the future and whether he could resist County Magistrate Wei's dictatorship. The serfs could turn over and sing, whether they would live standing or die kneeling. In short, this was the only light he could see at this moment. After a while, Magistrate Wang nodded with satisfaction. He touched his beardless chin and said, "Go find Registrar Zheng and tell him that I have something important to discuss with him. Then go to Intoxicated Fragrance Restaurant and book a table for tonight's banquet. By the way, send an invitation to Magistrate Li's mansion." Dinyo nodded and asked, "Find Registrar Zheng, book a banquet, send an invitation. Is that all? After you're done with these things, go pick up the manure water in the latrine of the county government office." Magistrate Wang turned around and walked back to his room. When he reached the door, he stopped and said indifferently, Pick up the manure water?" Hearing this, Dinyo's expression immediately changed. In a room at the back of the Anchi County government office, a slightly plump middle-aged man sat on a chair and flipped through a book on the table. Advisor Chen hurried over from outside. After knocking on the door, he entered the room and said respectfully, "Lord, I've informed all those people." "All of them?" County Magistrate Wei Dapeng raised his eyelids and asked, "What did they say?" Advisor Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry, Lord. If they're smart, they'll know what to do." County Magistrate Wei looked out of the window and said indifferently, "I'm just afraid that they're not smart." Advisor Chen laughed sinisterly. "If they're not smart, we'll make them smart." As if remembering something, County Magistrate Wei asked again, "Have you been to that theater?" "My lord, I've already informed them." Advisor Chen immediately replied. He raised his head to look at the county magistrate with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand why the county magistrate was so concerned about the affairs of those lowly actors. Shouldn't the most important thing now be striking while the iron is hot and establishing his prestige among the rural gentry of Anchi County so that he could gain a firm foothold here? County Magistrate Wei saw his advisor's confusion, but he was too lazy to explain. Although he still regarded those actors as untouchables, untouchables also had their own uses. At least the current public security situation in Anchi County was inextricably linked to them. As the county magistrate of Anchi County, how could he allow such power to fall into the hands of others? Nowadays, Anchi County was a paradise for most of the officials. Every year, the imperial court would inspect the county and place it at the top of the list. This was a great thing for the officials in the county. If they stayed here for a few years, they would be able to advance further and officially step into the center of power in this world. For example, he had coveted the position of his predecessor, the capital magistrate, for a long time. Has that kid been well-behaved recently? County Magistrate Wei asked again. Although he usually didn't discipline his son much, he had just arrived at Qing and Prefecture. In the prefectural city, there were countless people that even he couldn't afford to offend. That kid thought that he could do whatever he wanted after coming to Qing and Prefecture from the capital. He had caused a few troubles for him previously, and now that he had yet to gain a firm foothold here, he had to be kept in check. The young master has been much more well-behaved these days, but he has been loitering around the brothels a little. He seems to have some interest in a famous woman in Qing and Prefecture. Before Advisor Chen could finish, County Magistrate Wei waved his hand and interrupted him. Loitering around the brothels was nothing. As for the woman he liked, if her family was clean, he could even bring her back as a concubine. County Magistrate Wei had never cared about such things. As Advisor Chen walked out of the room, on the other side of the prefectural city, Yang Liuqing, who was cleaning the courtyard and thinking about what her master had said, suddenly raised her head and looked at the skinny young man who had just walked in. "Li is," the young man said loudly. When he saw the young girl in the courtyard, his eyes immediately widened and he swallowed the words he wanted to say. "What is it?" Yang Liuqing frowned slightly. The young man's gaze made her feel very repulsed. If he hadn't come to find her martial uncle, she would never have let him take a step into this courtyard. Ah, this lady is... The young man walked over with a smile. Yang Liuqing's eyebrows raised, and she said, "If you have something to say, hurry up and say it. If you don't want to say it, then scram." As the #1 follower of the county magistrate's son, she followed him in and out of the brothels all day. She had seen all kinds of beautiful girls, but none had dared to speak to her with such an attitude. The young man's face darkened, and he said, "Do you know who I am? Even that Li Yi doesn't dare to speak to me like this." Originally, Yang Liuqing was still hesitating, but after hearing the young man's words, she finally stopped thinking. She picked up the broom and walked over. The young man crossed his arms and swept his gaze impudently over Yang Liuqing's body. He smacked his lips and said, "Oh, this little beauty has quite a temper." His impudence didn't last long. Not long after, a scream came from the courtyard, and a figure directly flew out of the courtyard. The young man rolled on the ground for 3 to 5 feet. His clothes were torn, and his face was even more unrecognizable. He got up from the ground and wiped the blood from his nose. When he was about to curse, a broom flew out and fiercely hit his chest. The young man fell to the ground again. This time, he didn't dare to stay any longer, and he hurriedly crawled away. Yang Liuqing silently walked over, picked up the broom, and walked back to the courtyard without saying a word. These days, there were many people who came to find her martial uncle. At first, she was polite and welcomed a few people in. Later, her martial uncle said that if anyone came in the future, she could just use the broom to drive them out. However, she was worried that if she drove the wrong person away, it would delay her martial uncle's important matter. In the end, she didn't do it. Now it seemed that it was better to do as her martial uncle said. There was another more important thing. Should she also go out of the city to compete with people? These days, she had been improving rapidly. If she was lucky, she might be able to squeeze into the bottom of the heaven list. Her hands unconsciously swept the ground until another figure appeared in front of the door. What happened? When Li Yi saw Dinyo, he was holding his butt and crying softly. Of course, Dinyo couldn't tell him that he was beaten by a woman with a broom. He hurriedly handed over an invitation and said, "Sir, this is what Magistrate Wang asked me to send. He and Registrar Zheng are waiting for you at Drunken Fragrance Tower tonight." "So urgent?" Li Yi took the invitation and said, "It seems that Lord Wang and Lord Zheng don't seem to be doing well. Go back and tell them that I will go on time." "Sir, then I will go back first." Dinyo rubbed his butt and thought about whether this could be counted as a work injury. He didn't want compensation, but he still had to go to the toilet to carry feces. Chapter 416. "Uncle, Master asked me to tell you that you don't have to wait for her for dinner. Just leave some food for her." When Li Yi was copying Journey to the West and the Legend of the Condor Heroes in his room, Yang Liuqing walked in and said, "Mississippi, Lu finally found a new toy not long ago." The willing hero list was stirred up by her. It was said that the master who ranked 6th on the heaven list came all the way from Qingzhou to Qingan Prefecture to challenge her. He seemed to think that women were easier to bully. It was very likely that he could defeat her and refresh his ranking. The top 5 on the heaven list. Just thinking about it made him a little excited. If he worked harder, he could defeat the 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st and jump to the top of the list. Wouldn't that mean that he would be the #1 master below the master level? There were many people with this idea. In just a few days, Mississippi Lu had received many letters of challenge. Mississippi Lu wanted to see the world in chaos. She was worried about not being able to find a real master to spar with. Of course, she accepted all the letters of challenge. 2 days later, under everyone's endless anticipation, the 5th and 6th ranked experts on the heavenly list finally had an unparalleled battle. The result was that after 100 moves, the experts spat out 2 ounces of blood and the battle ended. It was said that on that day, Second young Lady Lu wielded her sword, her white clothes fluttering in the wind, and her sharp sword light blinded countless people's eyes. After that, the people who had challenged her never showed their faces again. According to Old Sun, the performance of the theater that day was more than 10 times that of the past. These days, Mississippi Lu was very busy. She usually didn't eat at home on time. He was already used to it. Got it. What else did she say? He continued to work and asked without raising his head. Master also said that she wanted to eat braised prawns and braised purple melon for dinner. Not too sour sweet and sour fish. Steamed rice should be neither too soft nor too hard. Anything else? He raised his head and squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Nothing else. Yang Liuqing hurriedly ran out. His voice came from outside the door. I'm going out of the city to look for Master. I can't help Marshal Uncle during dinner. Watching Yang Liuqing quickly disappear from his sight, Li sighed. She used to be such a hard-working little girl. Look at how she has been taught by Mississippi Lu. As for Mississippi Lu herself, she didn't stay at home all day. She still wanted to eat braised prawns, braised eggplant, and sweet and sour fish. If she came home late, she would eat leftovers. The Drunken Fragrance Tower was the most famous restaurant in Qing, in Prefecture. It was a high-class restaurant with exquisite dishes and attentive service. It was the first choice for high officials and nobles to treat their guests. Lord Li, it's been a long time. I've missed you. In a heaven-class room somewhere, Magistrate Wang looked enthusiastic. His attitude was even more enthusiastic than when Li Yi was the county lieutenant. Lord Li, please take a seat. Registrar Zheng was even more enthusiastic. He personally walked over and pulled out a chair for Li Yi. We are colleagues. You don't have to be so polite, Li Yi said with a smile. When he was the county lieutenant, he basically fished for 1 day and dried for 10 days. He didn't have much friendship with Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng. But after a few months, when he saw them again after the trip to the capital, he felt inexplicably closer. Magistrate Wang cupped his hands and said with a face full of smiles, "First of all, I have to congratulate Lord Li on being conferred a noble title. Since His Majesty ascended the throne, it has been extremely rare to be conferred a noble title. Lord Li's strong royal favor really makes me envious." Registrar Zheng also showed envy on his face. Why did they become officials? It was to bring honor to their ancestors and fight for a good inheritance for their descendants. Being promoted to a noble title was what they had been pursuing all their lives. They worked hard for half of their lives, but their lives became more and more miserable. Looking at Lord Li, he was so young. Alas, the more they thought about it, the more they felt that they were complete failures. Li Yi smiled and said, "What's there to be envious about, Lord Wang? Even His Majesty has praised Anxi County many times. Now that County Magistrate Lu has become the magistrate of the capital, the two of you will naturally have bright futures ahead of you." Alas, Lord Li doesn't know. Magistrate Wang sighed and said with great sorrow, "I really miss the days when Lord Lu was still around, standing behind Magistrate Wang." Denyo and another constable glanced at each other, and they both saw the fear in each other's eyes. Then they quietly took 2 steps back. In their minds, they had already made up a lot of 18 forbidden stories about Magistrate Wang and County Magistrate Lu that had to be told. After listening to Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng talk about County Magistrate Wei's behavior after being transferred to Anxi County, Li Yi pretended to be surprised and asked, "Lord Li, your situation has already deteriorated to such a state, but County Magistrate Wei is still so overbearing?" Magistrate Wang sighed and pointed to the top of his head, saying, "County Magistrate Wei was transferred from the capital. He already has a foundation and has the support of the magistrate's government, so he acts unscrupulously. The two of us have been working in Anxi County for many years, but we can't even compare to him for 2 months. Now, even the gentry who originally supported us are about to fall to his side." He was very clear about this. Although the county magistrate was the head of a county, his achievements still depended on the support of the people below him. The gentry of every place were equivalent to the local bullies. Without their cooperation, even the county magistrate would not be able to achieve anything. Most of the county magistrates appointed by the imperial court came from other places. It would take a long time to rope in these people. Similarly, Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng also had their own subordinates. The several parties restricted each other and cooperated with each other. This was the normal state of a county's leadership. Based on the current situation, the balance in Anxi County was obviously going to be broken by County Magistrate Wei. Once he established his dominance and authority, County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng would become empty shells. In the future, not to mention their future, they would definitely have to retire in advance and live a leisurely life. Magistrate Wang suddenly stood up and bowed to Li Yi respectfully together with Registrar Zheng. He said solemnly, "We know that Lord Li must have a way. As colleagues, please help us, Lord Li." As the second-in-command and third-in-command at county, they usually had to be bowed to by others. However, at this moment, they didn't care about it at all. Compared to their official career, these superficial things were not important at all. If Li didn't want to help them, he should be cooking braised prawns for Mississippi Lou in the kitchen at home, instead of talking nonsense with him here. It didn't matter who became the county magistrate of Anxi County, but it was a little too much for County Magistrate Wei to target the theater. If he really interfered with the theater, how could he carry out his work in the future? It would be too inconvenient to guide public opinion and create a rebellion. Regarding this matter, no matter what, he had no reason to sit back and do nothing. Chapter 417. You're too polite. He made a gesture with his hands and said, "Since you've said so, I can't just sit back and do nothing. But this matter can't be explained clearly in a few words. Let's sit down and talk about it slowly." After getting Li Yi's promise, Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng's dejection was swept away, and their faces were full of expectation. Even County Magistrate Liu had to respect County Magistrate Li before. Since he was so confident, the possibility of success should be 80 to 90%. "What's your plan?" Magistrate Wang looked at him and asked. Li Yi didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at them and asked, "Before that, I want to ask you two first. County Magistrate Wei squeezed you out. Did you really have no preparation at all?" If the two of them really watched them fall to this point without taking any measures, Li Yi felt that it would be better for them to be an empty shell. Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng looked at each other and hesitated for a moment. Then, they looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "You must be joking. If I really didn't have any preparation, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the chance to be the county magistrate more than 10 years ago." As soon as Magistrate Wang finished his words, Secretary Zheng smiled and took out a booklet from his arms. He handed it to Li Yi and said, "Have a look at this, Mr. Li." Dinyo and that constable looked at each other quickly. Having worked in the county government for so many years, how could they not have any political sense? They knew that what these officials are going to say should be something big, so they hurriedly said, "Mr. Li, we'd better stand outside and watch." Li waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal. You can listen to it if you want." Magistrate Wang's face showed a trace of thinking. The next moment, he said, "Listen to Mr. Li. You can stay here." Secretary Zheng nodded slightly and understood the implication of Magistrate Wang's words. From now on, Dainyu and Wei Chong would be their trusted subordinates. Magistrate Wang no longer looked at Dainyu and the others. He turned his head and looked at Li Yi with a trace of worry on his face. To tell you the truth, although County Magistrate Wei has done things perfectly, we still have some information that we can use against him. However, these are far from enough. County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng certainly wouldn't sit still and wait for death when County Magistrate Wei forced them like this. However, the problem was that the things they collected were far from enough to bring down County Magistrate Wei. In the officialdom, if they couldn't kill County Magistrate Wei with one blow, what awaited them would be more terrible things. These things are indeed not enough, but what if you add this? He took out a plate from his pocket and threw it to Magistrate Wang. Magistrate Wang hurriedly took the plate. After looking at it for a while, he asked in confusion, "Lord Li, what is this?" Looking at the puzzled expressions on their faces, Li Yi had the urge to turn around and leave. What? That Li Yi actually didn't come? In another room of the drunken fragrance tower, a noble young master said with a slightly angry expression. The young man, who looked a little embarrassed with a scratch on his forehead, gritted his teeth and said, "Young master, that Li Yi obviously didn't take you seriously. Are we just going to let this go? Is the Li Yi that young Master Wei mentioned the first talent of Qing in prefecture?" A young man in the room suddenly asked. "What? Is there a problem with that Li Yi?" The noble raised his eyebrows and said. The young man hesitated for a while and said, "Not really, but his background is indeed not that simple. If young Master Wei wants to touch him, you better be more careful." This young Master Wei had just arrived and hadn't heard the rumors about that person. Although he didn't know that much about that Li Yi, it was best to say what he knew to avoid unnecessary trouble. "Although my father doesn't allow me to cause any trouble during this period of time, you have hurt my people. If I just let this matter go, would I still have any face left?" Although he had already raised some vigilance in his heart, the noble young master was still unyielding with his words. The young man at the side suddenly thought of something and said, "Young master, sir seems to be at drunken fragrance tower tonight. So what if my father is here?" The noble slammed the table and said, "I don't want to do anything. Can't I just have a meal here?" Although he acted very domineering, the young man knew that his young master was scared. He had caused trouble a few times in a row and almost had Sir Wei punish him. During this time, he was much more peaceful than before. "Sir Wei, let us toast to you." In the first room of Drunken Fragrance Tower, a dozen people all stood up and raised the wine cups in their hands. They bowed and toasted County Magistrate Wei, who was sitting in the middle. County Magistrate Wei calmly raised his cup and took a sip, while the others could only drink up the wine in their cups. In the future, we have to rely on Sir Wei more. Everyone knew the purpose of tonight's banquet. After talking for a while, they had to express their attitude straightforwardly. Before this, they had done enough research on County Magistrate Wei. They knew that he had an extraordinary background and acted in an overbearing manner. In the county government, County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zhang were both suppressed by him and could not turn over a new leaf. The balance in the hearts of those who were close to County Magistrate Wei gradually tilted. They chose an official just for the better continuation of their families. Since Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zhang had lost their power, they naturally had to choose a new big tree to rely on. Although County Magistrate Wei didn't show any expression on his face, he was very satisfied in his heart. After glancing around, he suddenly frowned and asked Advisor Chen, "What about the people in the theater?" Advisor Chen's face was also a little bad as he said, "Sir, that old man's son really doesn't know how to appreciate favors." County Magistrate Wei didn't speak anymore, but his eyes narrowed. Since ancient times, officials in the capital were 3 ranks higher than those in the capital. Although his rank didn't change after he was transferred to Qing, in prefecture, he didn't think much of places other than the capital. Even though this was Qing, in prefecture, a place that even the king of Shu valued very much. With the help of his superiors, he had been doing things smoothly these days. When he encountered some small obstacles, he felt that it was a little interesting. County Magistrate Wei showed a trace of smile on his face, which made the people around him feel cold. At this moment, the door of the room was pushed open. County Magistrate Wei, who was thinking about something, didn't notice it, but the others saw it immediately. When they saw Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zhang, some people looked a little embarrassed because just a few days ago, they were on the side of these two people. More people were confused and shocked. They didn't know why these two people, who shouldn't be here, would appear here. Magistrate Wang glanced at the crowd and said expressionlessly, "You guys go out first." Even if Magistrate Wang was suppressed by County Magistrate Wei, they couldn't disobey him. When immortals fought, it was better for ordinary people like them to stay far away. County Magistrate Wei finally collected his thoughts. Seeing that everyone had left the door, he did not stop them. Instead, he looked up at County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng and said with a smile, "Oh, I wonder what brings you here." Although Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng were half a rank lower than the county magistrate, as the second-in-command and third-in-command of a county, County Magistrate Wei's attitude was extremely arrogant. Daniu and Wei Chong had already closed the door, leaving only County Magistrate Wei and Advisor Chun. Magistrate Wang wasn't angry about County Magistrate Wei's attitude. He threw a booklet in his hand on the table and said lightly, "Sir Wei, you've committed a crime." Chapter 4:18. County Magistrate Wei casually picked up the booklet, flipped it a few times, and actually nodded in agreement. He looked at the two and said, "It's beyond my expectation that you could do this. I really underestimated you." He never thought that the two men, who had been in the position of county magistrate and secretary for so many years, were idiots, but he didn't guard against them. Because County Magistrate Wei knew that most of what he did was not for himself. Even if he had some selfish motives, it was harmless. Even if these things were really put on the table, he wouldn't be afraid. However, he was a little curious about what the two men were thinking. Was this what County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng relied on? Did they really want to turn the tables with these things? County Magistrate Wei threw the booklet on the ground and said, "If this is all, I'm afraid I'll let you down." When County Magistrate Wei said these words, his tone was a little cold. County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng chose the most inappropriate time and the most inappropriate place to offend him. Although it made him a little unhappy, he didn't have to worry about what he was going to do next. "We are colleagues. Why do you have to force us?" County Magistrate Wang sighed and bent down to pick up the booklet on the ground. County Magistrate Wei said lightly, "Things in officialdom are always involuntary. You've been an official for so many years. Don't you know this truth?" Clap. A crisp sound suddenly sounded in the room, like the sound of a piece of wood falling to the ground. County Magistrate Wang picked up a small wooden plate that fell out of his arms and said, "As a county magistrate, County Magistrate Wei should set an example. It's wrong to throw things at random. Even if it can't hit people, it's not good to hit flowers and plants. If it's seen by outsiders, it will damage your reputation." County Magistrate Wang didn't put the wooden plate back into his arms again. He deliberately waved it in front of County Magistrate Wei and said, "Is what I said right or not? What do you think?" County Magistrate Wang's words were not timely. If there was no wooden plate, County Magistrate Wei would definitely think that there was something wrong with his brain and that he was talking nonsense. But he saw it after all, and he saw it very clearly. When he saw that extremely ordinary wooden plate, County Magistrate Wei's indifferent face disappeared, and his pupils suddenly shrank. "Sir, the dishes in the kitchen are not for sale. If you want to eat something, just tell us, and we will immediately prepare and send it to you." "This won't do." The cook of Fragrant House looked helpless. The young man in front of him was simply the weirdest guest he had ever met. If he wanted to eat something, he could tell the waiter, and they would naturally prepare and send it to him as soon as possible. But he didn't order any dishes. Instead, he insisted to buy some fish and prawns and Kunlun purple melons. "Didn't up." The waiter behind the young man winked at the cook and said, "What are you talking about? This guest is a distinguished guest. Isn't it just a few dishes? Hurry up and prepare." If other guests had made such a request, they would have chased them out as troublemakers. However, the guests in the heavenly room were not ordinary. It was not worthwhile to offend them for such a small matter. The fish must be fresh, the prawns must be no less than 1 inch, and the Kunlun purple melons were the first batch of this year. It was not worthwhile to offend them for such a small matter. The fish had to be fresh, and the shrimp couldn't be smaller than 1 inch. As for the Kunlun purple melon, that was the first crop of the year. Even the restaurant couldn't meet the demand. This young master really knew how to pick. The fish must be fresh, the prawns must not be less than 1 inch, and the Kunlun purple melons, that was actually the first batch of this year. The supply could not meet the demand. This young man really knew how to choose. County Magistrate Wei came from the capital, so he shouldn't be as ignorant as those two. The Secret Intelligence Department was actually a sharp blade hanging over the heads of all the officials, from the 7th-rank county magistrate to the 1st-rank officials. No one was not afraid of these people who dissociated from the law and represented the will of the emperor. On the way from the capital to Qing, in prefecture, he had used this wooden plate several times and made some additional discoveries. Apart from the capital, the power of the Secret Intelligence Division was everywhere. The officials never knew their counselors, housekeepers, or even coachmen at home. Besides being counselors, housekeepers, and coachmen, they didn't know what other identities they had. A wooden plate inadvertently revealed could change the position of the master and servant instantly. The emperor couldn't be a harmless uncle next door. Li even suspected that there was someone who meticulously recorded how many times the officials had sex with their wives at night. Whether there was such a person in the Viscount's mansion, Li didn't know, but it wouldn't affect him much. The maids who could enter the inner courtyard all grew up in the Li mansion. When he was sunbathing in the yard, no one could hear him except the wind. When he was about to go upstairs, a few figures came down from upstairs. The young man in the lead had a young woman in his arms. Surrounded by several people, they took up most of the space on the stairs. When Li walked up sideways, he suddenly saw the woman turn her head and ask in surprise, "Are you Li?" Li turned his head and saw the surprised expression on the woman's face. He looked at her carefully and realized that he didn't know her. The young man with the woman in his arms was stunned for a moment. He looked at Li and said with a slightly angry expression, "You are Li? What a big show. You made me wait for so long." The young man behind the young man was stunned. It seemed that he hadn't had time to say this today before he was beaten out. But why was Li here? Had he already said it? But he was beaten so badly by the woman that he forgot? Li glanced at the young man's face. He still didn't know this man. What did he mean just now? "Let me tell you, Goddess Luo Shui is mine. You'd better stay away from Lady Zue Mo in the future, otherwise." The young man let go of the woman, looked at Li and threatened. "Psycho." Li turned his head and left. He had seen too many people like this in the past few days. Before the young man finished his words, he had to stop. A trace of anger appeared on his face. He strode upstairs and reached out to grab Li's collar. In the innermost part of the 2nd floor, outside the Tianzi room number 1, many people were waiting anxiously, but there was no sound from the room. County Magistrate Wei and County Magistrate Wang, Secretary Zheng, had already fallen out. What else could be discussed for so long? Of course, no one knew that in the room, a layer of sweat had appeared on County Magistrate Wei's forehead. The Secret Intelligence Office. It was actually the Secret Intelligence Office. How could County Magistrate Wang be His Majesty's man? County Magistrate Wei used to be an official in the capital, so he was naturally knowledgeable. How could he not know the department that made countless officials tremble just by hearing its name? If the censors were hawks that supervised the officials in the open, then the Secret Intelligence Office was a poisonous snake hiding in the dark. No one knew when they would jump out and bite people. But there was no doubt that the officials who were lucky enough to see the people of the Secret Intelligence Office would never see anything else. The moment he saw the plate, County Magistrate Wei finally realized that he was not dealing with County Magistrate Wang, nor the Secret Intelligence Office, but it was the existence that made him break out in a cold sweat at the thought of it. It was an existence that, no matter who was behind him or what background he had, he could not disobey. At this time, it was no longer important whether he had done anything or not. Had those people ever cared about those things? Even if the Anshi County Magistrate hung himself on the beam of his house tomorrow morning, he would not be able to cause much trouble. Yes, Lord Wang is right. County Magistrate Wei forcibly suppressed the fear in his heart, stood up from his seat, and bowed, saying, "Lords, please sit down." The people outside the door had been waiting for a long time, and finally heard a sound coming from behind them. The door was opened from the inside, and then everyone saw a scene that made them extremely shocked and confused. Thank you, Lord Wei. County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng walked out with smiles on their faces. The one who spoke was County Magistrate Wang. Haha, you're too polite. As the Anshi County Magistrate, this is my duty. County Magistrate Wei walked side by side with them. His face was ruddy, and he also had a bright smile on his face. The scene of everyone being good to each other and the world being peaceful and stable immediately made everyone's eyes pop out. When County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng entered just now, weren't there still sparks flying in all directions? Why were they suddenly beaming with joy and loving? What did the three of them do in such a short period of time? How could there be such a huge change? Chapter 419. Why are you still here? County Magistrate Wei looked at the people at the door and asked with a frown. Hearing County Magistrate Wei's words, these representatives of the gentry cursed in their hearts. If you didn't invite us here, who would be willing to come here and pretend to be a coward? Of course, they couldn't show these thoughts. They were eager to get involved in the affairs of County Magistrate Wei and County Magistrate Wang, so they immediately cupped their hands and left. Ah, it hurts, it hurts. Let go. The young noble's body was twisted into a strange angle, and his wrist was pinched by another young man. He walked from the front, howling miserably. Dad, save me. Seeing County Magistrate Wei standing at the door of a room, the young noble's howl became louder. Seeing his son being restrained, County Magistrate Wei's face changed. When he was about to speak, County Magistrate Wang pulled his sleeve and secretly made a gesture. County Magistrate Wei's body shook, and his face was a little pale. He hurriedly walked over and said, "Is it Lord Li? My son has offended you. I didn't discipline him well. I apologize to Lord Li on his behalf." Li let go of the young man's wrist, cupped his hands, and said to County Magistrate Wei, "Lord Wei, it's an honor to meet you." County Magistrate Wei gave a hollow laugh. When he turned to look at the young noble, his face suddenly darkened, and he said angrily, "Unfilial son, apologize to Lord Li." The young noble was still a little confused at this time. Just now, he wanted to pat Li Yi's shoulder, but his wrist was grabbed by him. It was very painful to struggle a little, and he was dragged here awkwardly. Now his father's enigmatic, respectful attitude was like a blow to his head. He trembled and said, Lord Li, I'm sorry." Another pursuer of Zheng Zumo. Li had been used to it these days. Then he looked at County Magistrate Wang, who was beaming with joy. It seemed that he and Registrar Zheng should have settled the matter. In this way, Li had nothing to say to them and County Magistrate Wei. He put away the card. The waiter had already brought what he wanted and threw him a piece of silver. Under the surprised and puzzled eyes of several people, he slowly walked out of Drunken Fragrance Restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. This Lord Li is really... County Magistrate Wei thought for a long time as he watched him leave with a paper bag in one hand and a live fish in the other, but he couldn't think of a word to describe him. He had never thought that such a person was actually a superior of the Secret Intelligence Office. Fortunately, the other party didn't seem to want to kill him. County Magistrate Wei let out a sigh of relief in his heart. At this point, the development of the matter had completely gone out of his control. It was not good to be caught between two big shots, so it was better to let this matter rot in his heart forever. When he turned his head to look at County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng, the smile on his face brightened again. It was late at night, and Mississippi Lou was sitting in the courtyard. On the stone table, there were a few dishes that she had casually mentioned before she left in the morning. At that time, she really just said it casually. In fact, after leaving home, even she herself had forgotten about it. However, these dishes were now placed on the stone table, still slightly steaming. She glanced at the candlelight in the room and picked up the chopsticks. "Husband, rest early. It won't be too late to continue writing tomorrow morning." He was writing at a rapid speed by the table. Rui walked over from the bedside and gently massaged his shoulders. "There's no hurry. If you're tired, go to sleep first. I have other things to do tomorrow morning." Rui didn't answer, but she didn't move her body either. She just stood behind him, and the strength of her hands gradually became gentler. She lowered her head and quietly looked at what he was writing on the paper. It was rare to see someone as lazy as him doing something so seriously. These days, she could clearly feel that he was a little different from before. Although she didn't understand what he was doing, nor did she know how she could help him, at least for now, she could do something for him. Bang! The oil lamp exploded, and Li just happened in a new chapter. He stretched his arms and was slightly stunned by the softness in his palms. When he turned his head, he saw Rui standing there, blinking at him. "Ah, wife, why aren't you asleep yet?" he asked in surprise. "What time is it now?" "It's just past midnight." Rui looked at him and asked, "Husband, do you still want to continue writing?" No. Li waved his hand and carried her by the waist. He walked to the bedside and said, "It's getting late. It's time to sleep." She only struggled symbolically for a few moments before completely giving up. Even the side of her neck was covered with a layer of pink. Omitted here. Time passed quietly. Only when they thought back would they feel that time had passed quickly. They couldn't even remember what had happened in the past few days. But for the women in the capital, this wasn't the case. They could clearly remember the specific day of a certain month and what kind of perfume the perfume shop had released. Every season, there would be a different perfume. The originally dull days suddenly became incomparably exciting. It's been another month. Does that guy not intend to come back? Li Xian's complexion looked somewhat haggard. He rubbed the space between his brows and pushed away the pile of blueprints on the table. He carefully supported the crown princess, who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He carried her horizontally on the brocade couch, tucked the corners of the blanket, and sat back at the table. The perfume business had been going smoothly. Even he himself didn't know how much money the crown prince's residence had. Other things made him somewhat vexed. The recent research had all reached a bottleneck, and there had been no progress for many days. Uncle Huang had fallen ill half a month ago, and his health had been deteriorating. He hadn't attended court for half a month. If not for the left and right prime ministers handling the political affairs, the entire court would have long been in chaos. Under this chaos, there were more and more calls for the appointment of a successor. The king of Shu could be said to be riding on the crest of success these days. He had close contact with countless high-ranking officials in the court. He would probably wake up laughing even in his dreams. Uncle Huang's illness was one thing, but so was the king of Shu. Other than the crown prince's residence, he actually didn't have much of a good impression of the entire capital. In the past, when he encountered difficulties, there were still people who could help him. But now, that person who could help him was having a good time in Qing and Prefecture. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't let go of the matters in the capital, how could not want to live such a happy life? Looking at the sky, a trace of tiredness appeared on Li Xian's face. It was getting late. He should rest early. He still had to go to the palace early in the morning. Thinking of this, he walked to the bedside, lay down beside the crown princess, and slept in his clothes. "Haha, sir won't come back," Prince Jean said proudly as he pinched Yong Ning's little face, leaving a red mark on her delicate little face. The little girl looked up at him. There was no change in her expression, as if she wasn't the one being bullied. A few palace maids and eunuchs stood in the distance, looking at Princess Yong Ning with a sorrowful expression. However, Prince Jin's guard were staring at them, so they didn't dare to act rashly. A young figure appeared in the distance. After seeing this scene, Li Xian walked over with a frown and said, "Li Han, you bullied Yong Ning again." When he saw Li Xian walking over, Li Han stuck out his tongue and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Although Li Xian wasn't his biological brother, Li Han had heard that he could make people fly like a kite. Shanning had seen it with her own eyes. Li Han was worried that he would also be used as a kite. Because he was afraid of heights, he usually avoided this cousin of his. Li Xian looked coldly at Prince Jin's guards and said, "You guys, if you help Prince Jin to bully Princess Yong Ning again, don't blame me for breaking your legs." The guards repeatedly nodded in agreement. His Highness Prince Jin was still a child, but Prince Li Xian wasn't. If he dared to break their legs, he would really do it. In the future, they had to stay far away from him. However, Prince Jin's actions weren't something that the people around Princess Yongning dared to stop. Li Xian only saw it. They were all children. Besides, he also did the same thing at that time. It was just that the other princes were beaten, and the one who beat them was Mingdu. He looked at Princess Yongning, who was in a daze, and walked straight to a palace. Before he entered the palace, he saw two figures coming out of the hall. Li Xian greets Prime Minister Shun and Prime Minister Qin. The two people who came out of the hall were the two prime ministers of the current dynasty. They were both veterans of several dynasties. Not to mention Li Xian, even the princes had to greet them as juniors. The two old men also nodded slightly to him. The old man, who was called Prime Minister Shun by Li Xian, looked at him deeply when he passed by, but Li Xian, who was worried, didn't notice it. A eunuch had already gone in to report. He stood outside the hall for a long time before the eunuch came out and asked him to come in. Emperor Jing was lying on the brocade couch. His face was slightly pale, and there was a thick twilight on his face. When he saw Li Xian coming in, he squeezed a smile on his face and said, "Xian is here. Come to Uncle Huang." "Uncle Huang, are you feeling better?" Li Xian walked over quickly and looked at the man who had been indomitable in his heart since he was young. He couldn't help but choke with sobs when he saw him so weak. Emperor Jing patted the back of his hand and said with a smile, "Haha, don't worry. Uncle Huang still has some days to live. I won't go after the late emperor so soon. Uncle Huang carries the fate of the entire Jing kingdom. With the blessing of the heavens, you will definitely be safe." Li Xian's palm tightened slightly as he said in a low voice. When he was a child, he stayed in the palace for a few years. Whether it was the emperor or the empress, they all took care of him. Other than his parents, he also had deep feelings for them. Emperor Jing didn't continue the topic just now. He looked at him and said, "You don't look very well. Is there anything bothering you these days?" "Nothing. Maybe I've been too tired recently." Li Xian shook his head and said. Emperor Jing was silent for a while and said, "Originally, you should be living a carefree and happy life in Qing and Fu. It was I who made you stay in Jingdo and do these things that you didn't want to do. Do you resent me because of this?" Li Xian was startled. He immediately shook his head and said, "Uncle Huang naturally has his reasons for doing this. I have never thought of it this way." Emperor Jing's face showed a gratified expression. He said, "Because of what happened to me, the Empress has not had a good time these days. Other than Mingzu, among these children, you are the closest to her. If there's nothing important, go spend more time with her." "Little Xian understands," Li Xian said with a nod. "Your Majesty, it's time to take your medicine." A ghostly figure suddenly appeared in the hall, and then Changda's hoarse voice was heard. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the hall. He stood at the door and let out a long sigh. The omnipotent giant, in his impression, seemed to have really fallen. He hoped that the pills made by the Taoist priests would be useful. He heard that after taking their pills, one could live forever. There should be no problem in treating Uncle Huang's illness. Thinking of what the emperor had just said, he walked out of the palace and turned in a direction. That was the empress's palace. With the two prime ministers and countless courtiers, even the emperor was gone in a short time. Even Jingdo was operating steadily and orderly, let alone Qing and Fu. In the past month, Old Sun had been even busier. Not only did he have to deal with the matters of the theater, but he also had to prepare for the trip to Jingdo. Although he had gone to Jingdo, the theater in Qing and Fu had to continue operating. Before he left, he had to choose suitable people to take over here. Although he had consciously trained some talents, they were still a long way from being able to take charge. Fortunately, other than that, he didn't have to worry about other miscellaneous matters. Advisor Chin's attitude toward him couldn't be better. As long as it was related to the theater, he would give him the green light. The theater had already integrated more than 80% of the wandering performers in Qing and prefecture, and the team was constantly expanding. Every day, Old Man Sun felt that he was one step closer to his dream. Just a while ago, the legend of the Condor Heroes had officially ended. Another story called The Return of the Condor Heroes had seamlessly connected with it. Not only had its popularity not decreased, but it had also ushered in a new wave of popularity. And Journey to the West, which was still continuing, had always maintained a high level of popularity. When it was being told, it was almost always full. It was hard to imagine what effect it would have if it was adapted into a play. This made his admiration for Young Surly reach its peak. High-quality content was always the foundation of survival for actors. As long as he was there, they didn't have to worry about this problem. Every time he thought of the fact that Jingdo was still an undeveloped wasteland in this area, Old Sun wished he could grow wings and fly there. The noon of May was already very hot. Li estimated that the temperature outside was at least 35 degrees. He had already moved the rocking chair back and held a large block of ice in his arms. He also placed ice basins in the four corners of the room. Only then did he feel much more comfortable. Xiao Huan's teeth were very good. She sat beside him. Pieces of crushed ice were thrown into her mouth and crunched noisily. Who would have ice to eat in the middle of summer? Ever since she could remember, this was the most comfortable summer she had. This kind of life was also what Li liked. If it wasn't for a series of letters from Jingdo, the last of which brought news of the old madam's illness, Li wouldn't have even thought of going back. Chapter 420. Son-in-law, are we going back to the capital? Xiao Huan put a piece of crushed ice into Li Yi's mouth and blinked as she asked. Li Yi had added sugar to the ice. It was sweet, although it couldn't compare to the ice cream he had eaten before. Under the current conditions, it was the only necessary item to relieve the heat. Let's wait a few more days when the weather is cooler. Li Yi also understood that he couldn't hide in Qing and Fu forever. They had already been away from the capital for more than 3 months. The old mistress was clearly very anxious. Now that many matters in Qing and Fu had been sorted out, it was time to return. The busiest person in the family was Mississippi Lu. Other than coming back on time for meals, he couldn't see her at any other time. In the afternoon, after eating, the heat gradually dissipated. It was also the busiest time of the day in the prefectural city. Li Yi, Rui, and Xiao Huan walked on the street. The small ice can in Xiao Huan's hands was confiscated by him. In order to prevent her from getting a stomachache, the little servant girl looked at him with a pitiful expression all the way. Li Yi turned a blind eye to her strategy of acting cute until the ice inside melted into water. Under the resentful gaze of the little servant girl, he gulped it down. When they reached the front of a shop, Xiao Huan and Rui stood in the shade and waited. Li Yi went to buy them mung bean smoothies. On the lower right corner of the shop signboard, there was a small willow leaf imprint. This meant that this shop was now under Li Yi's name. The method of making ice in the summer was, of course, provided by Li Yi. The theater was no longer just a place for storytelling and acting. The business under his name had also begun to involve other fields. Other than those wealthy families who could afford to build ice houses, ordinary people would not be able to see ice in the heat of the summer. Therefore, although it was no longer the hottest place of the day, there was still a long line in front of the shop. Of course, Li did not need to line up. He entered through a small door on the side. The people in line only looked at him enviously and did not criticize him. They didn't have a tael of silver to spare to apply for a VIP card, so they naturally couldn't use the VIP channel. The shop assistant obviously knew this young boss. After respectfully leading him to the rest area at the side, he immediately turned around to prepare. There were several lines in front of the long counter, but only one of them went all the way to the door. Behind the counter was a young girl about 15 or 16 years old. She had a sweet smile, and 2 dimples appeared at the corners of her mouth. Even the people in other lines could not help but stare at her. It said that this shop's Xiaonyang looks pure and lovely. Now that I've seen her today, she really lives up to her reputation. To tell you the truth, there are 3 shops selling green bean smoothie in Qing and Prefecture. I came to the furthest one to see this lady. Haha, this brother and I are kindred spirits. Who didn't want to taste a cooling cup of green bean smoothie on a hot summer day? However, ice cubes were priceless. Those rich families didn't even have enough for themselves and kept it to themselves. Why would they take it out to sell? In this scorching hot weather, spending 10 copper coins to experience the refreshing and stimulating feeling of ice cubes was something that no one could resist. Therefore, the day the shop opened for business, people almost broke the doorway. Because of its low price and good service, even though 2 more shops were opened, the supply was still not enough to meet the demand in the prefectural city. Thus, the name Green Bean Smoothie quickly spread throughout the prefectural city. At the same time, the name of this sweet, smiling, pure, and lovely smoothie sister also became famous. In the beginning, there were only a few people talking about a certain Xiao Nyang selling green bean smoothie on a certain street in the prefectural city. She was beautiful and very pleasing to the eye, greatly improving their shopping experience. Later, for some reason, these voices gradually increased. The rumor said that Xiao Nyang was as beautiful as a fairy, rare in this world and difficult to find in the heavens. Countless people came here not to buy things, but to admire the beauty of a fairy. The facts naturally caused them to be slightly disappointed. How could there be a heavenly immortal? Even though that little lady was beautiful, she couldn't compare to the likes of Lu Qiao Qiao and Feng Miao Miao. But they had to admit that her smile was sweet. Even though it was slightly less charming than the two of them, it was more pure, and it caused others to be unable to help but arouse a feeling of tenderness with a single glance. The price was good, and the beauty was pleasing to the eye. As a result, the shop's business naturally became better, and there were often long lines at the door. In front of the beauty, although everyone was also whispering, their behavior was quite well behaved. When they took the green bean smoothie, they did not do anything out of line. It was not that they did not want to, but the 2 men who were wiping the tables in the corner were too fierce. A few days ago, there was a ruffian who wanted to take advantage of the girl. He had only touched her small hand, but he was almost beaten half to death by the 2 men. He was tied to the pillar at the door and left to bask in the sun for the whole afternoon. It was a tragic scene. Li Yi took 3 cups of smoothie and went out. Listening to the contents of the discussion, he had to admit that she was indeed worthy of being the goddess of Luo Shui, the former top artist of the Jade Courtyard. In terms of the ability to support people, even if Li Yi did the planning himself, he might not be better than Zheng Zhemo. After all, the era was different. Many of the methods he knew were not applicable here. After eating the smoothie, he returned the cup. Nowadays, not only did people buy green bean smoothie, but they also bought the exquisite cups that Li Yi had personally designed and could only be found in smoothie shops. Soon, he walked out of the city. Not far from the city gate, he could see a huge open space surrounded by wooden stakes. There were fences built in the open space, as well as a high platform 5 feet above the ground. From afar, he could see people moving around on the high platform, and the cheers from below were endless. There is almost no need for constables in Qing and prefectural city now. On the streets, brave heroes could be seen at any time. Even the most common bullying rarely happened, let alone murder. As for the surrounding bandits, they had almost disappeared without a trace. They did not even dare to show their heads, afraid that if they were not careful, they would give up their heads and be used by the heroes to make a name for themselves. That great hero, who was ranked in the top 10 of the Heaven ranking, was ranked first on the chivalry ranking even though he was not at the top of the expert ranking board. He had already used the heads of more than 10 Imperial Court criminals to clear the ranking board, and he had leaped to the top of the chivalry ranking board in one go. He was respected by countless people, and this was what it meant to be a man of both virtue and skill. On the other hand, those who were ranked high in martial arts but did not do any chivalry deeds were far less famous than him. People had gradually acknowledged that martial arts did not make one a chivalrous hero. Martial ethics were the standard to judge a chivalrous hero. Just like Hero Guijing, a chivalrous hero who served the country and the people, he was truly the model of a new era's chivalrous hero, a role model that everyone respected. As for those famous martial arts figures that people were familiar with, there were martial arts figures hiding deep in the mountains or in their own homes. if they had the ability, come out and make a name for themselves on the chivalry ranking. Those who were not on the chivalry ranking were all bullsh asterisk T heroes. When it came to these martial arts figures, He found it strange at first. Did they not have to do anything? Why did they wander around Qing in Prefectural City all day? Later, he found out that most of them were wandering heroes who were obsessed with martial arts. How could they have the chance to see so many experts compete? They would not miss it no matter what. When the three of them walked onto the high platform, the winner was decided. A man flew down from the platform in a sorry state. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.